This is why he is at an advantage in a fight when he knows his opponent's awakened powers. He then kicks him again, but Jiangsu stays firm and says he can't knock him down with that. Yiwu already knows this and thinks that it wasn't enough to knock him down. The attack was to deal damage to his legs so that he could outspeed him even more, and everyone was shocked to see his large number of instant attacks. Jiangsu becomes seriously injured and thinks he could just hit him once, and Jiwu would go down in no time. Mr. Zhang thinks he doesn't only have speed, but is using his fast speed properly to increase the damage done to his opponent. He wonders where on earth these kids spring up from, and there is no need to see more of this. Jiangsu is injured when he calls them from behind and says it's enough. Jiangsu again says he can still fight, but he replies he can't change the outcome if he gives him another chance. He is worried that his first impression went wrong, but he must catch the eyes of the executives of the groups no matter what. Wuan thumbs up for him, and Jiwu just smiles. At the same time, Caden is wandering through the academy and thinks this place is beyond his expectations, and he can feel some powerful energy here and there. It's interesting that they teach kids in one place, but they have put in more effort than he thought. Suddenly, he is shocked to see Mr. Han there and wonders what he is doing there. He asks his secretary if this is a stray cat, and he replies that it's registered as a pet of an unaffiliated awakened one who recently arrived. He releases his energy and stares at him, while Caden gets scared and wonders if he notices anything. However, he likes the cat and asks who brought such a cute cat. He wishes he could have him, but he already has an owner. He asks him to play with him and will give him treats. Conversely, Mr. Zhang asks the next student to go, and one of them comes forward, thinking that all the tough ones are done so that it will be easy for him. Mr. Zhang asks Jihai to fight him. She comes forward and asks Gangwu if he will hit her with his strength. He replies that he doesn't have a choice but to hit her, while she requests him to go easy on him. Gangwu smiles and says it would be cruel of him to hit her with all his might. He thinks why he would care about her when they met only a half-month ago. Mr. Zhang asks them to start, and Gangwu asks her not to move if she wants this to hurt less. However, he is shocked when she creates a bubble of air and holds him in it. She takes him upward while he is shocked and asks her to put her down. Jihee smiles and thinks he is just an idiot who has let his guard down. She asks him to stop struggling and stay still because she can drop him from there. Everyone is watching them while Guanggu requests her not to drop him. She apologizes to him and says she doesn't have a choice, but falling him from this height won't kill him. She thinks she has never dropped someone from this height, so she doesn't know how badly he would get hurt. She wishes she could lift him higher, but she has her limits and thinks about dropping him because she is getting tired. However, she will be in trouble if he is fine, so he will put him as high as possible. She claps while laughing and drops him in the air. He drops to the ground from a height and is badly injured. Jiangsu thinks her power is useless, but she uses it in a good way. Guanggu abuses her and says he will not leave her, and she is about to lift him again, saying once isn't enough for him. She drops him again and makes his fun, saying he sounded like he was going to kill her. She again makes him fall, and he passes out with his injuries. Mr. Zhang orders a student to take him to the medical center, and Jiwu also steps up for help. The boy thanked him and took him to the medical center. After that, Mr. Zhang orders Jiwu to spar with Jihai and says Jiangxi fight twice, so they will also fight twice. Wuan calls him and says he only sparred once, but he replies he doesn't need this because he is good. He thinks there is no need to see more of Wuan, but he is still unaware of Jiwu's abilities. He asks them to get ready for the spar, and Jihai thinks he seems really fast. She is a little worried that he knows her awkward power, but thinks it won't be much of a problem. She plans to just leave him in the air and drop him a few times as she did with Gangwu. They both take their position, and she attacks him first, but she is shocked that he disappears before her. After that, he reaches her in an instant and targets her by hitting from the side. She falls to the ground at a great distance, and Jiwu gets worried about her. Jiangsu is surprised by his speed and thinks he didn't go full speed when he was fighting him, and Mr. Zhang also observes that he is faster than earlier. Jiwu got too nervous after seeing her fight and used more strength than he intended. He asks her if she is alright, and Mr. Zhang notices he isn't going all out earlier, but this is beyond his expectations. He has been trained to fight, using his power to his advantage. Jiwoo calls him and informs him that Jihai has passed out, but he asks her not to worry because the durability of awakened ones' bodies is different from that of ordinary people. She will recover soon after being treated at the medical center within the academy. Jiwoo seems worried and relaxed after hearing this, and Mr. Jang observes that he's a real softie. After the class, he comes back to his room, where Kaden is waiting for him. He asks him how his day was and if he had looked around this place, and Kaden replies he was just surprised to find out that many strong, awakened ones were there. He thinks he never expected to see Seongguk-han there and asks Jiwoo about his first day of class. He tells him that the instructor made them spar with each other to see how good they are, and Kaden observes he won the spar. Jiwoo tells him that he sparred 2 times and won both times. He also tells him that his first opponent could enhance his strength and his body's durability, and he said he could lift about 200 pounds with one hand. He increased his speed just enough to dodge his attacks and fought with him calmly, and he damaged his legs to slow him down. Kaden appreciates him, says he just did as he taught him, and tells him about his second opponent that she could use psychokinesis and lifted a person in the air and dropped him from about 65 feet up. He then knocked her out, and she passed out from his attack. Mr. Han sees a dream again when he fights with Mr. Han, and he is shocked by getting defeated by a young kid. He asks him about his name, and Kaden tells him, and he is surprised to know that he is Kaden. He thought he was just Saw Kid S who didn't know his place, and he didn't expect him to be that strong. Kaden replies he didn't expect him to be this strong either, and he thought he was just on old man fling the post. Meanwhile, a professor comes to him and brings him into consciousness. He apologizes to him for distracting him for a moment, and he informs him that Kaden went missing. He tells him that since he has conflicts with other awakened ones, he drew attention wherever he was, but he hasn't been seen recently. The teacher asks him if he is also interested in Kaden, and he replies that there is no one who is not interested in him among the renowned awakened ones. The next morning, Kaden is training in his room when Jiwoo informs him that he is heading out. He thinks he needs to focus on his recovery, and if Seongguk-han figures out who he is before he recovers, then things might get out of hand. He didn't expect to find him there since he was retired and wondered what he was up to. Jiwoo and Wooin go to the class, and he greets everyone, but they seem upset. Jiwoo asks Jihai if she is okay, and says he got too nervous and lost control over his strength, and apologizes to her. He also asks Gangwoo if he is okay since he fell from such a height, while they wonder why he is acting like they are friends. He also calls Wooseok and asks if he got back alright yesterday. He also asks Jeongsu about his health, and says he looks like he has recovered already. He asks him how he can recover so fast, but he thinks Jiwoo is looking down on him. Meanwhile, Mr. Jang enters there and asks them to start running and don't stop until he tells them to. They are shocked at such a decision, and he asks Jeongsu and Gangwoo to run twice as fast as Wooseok and Jihai. Jeongsu is upset and thinks he didn't come to the Awakened Academy to run, and Mr. Jang asks Jiwoo and Wooin to run 3 times as fast as the others. They follow their instructions immediately and start running, and he asks others if they are just going to stand there. They also start running, and after a whole day of running, they seem in very bad condition. They are shocked that Mr. Jang made them run at full speed for 5 straight hours. Mr. Jang then leaves them, saying the class is over, and asks them to make sure to eat their meal at the cafeteria. Jiwoo calls him and asks if this is the end of today's class, and says yesterday's class ended early just because of injuries from sparring, but today's class ended pretty early too. Mr. Jang replies this is all for today and asks them to get proper nutrition and let their body recover. He gets happy and asks everyone to go and eat. At the cafeteria, they discuss that it is unfair to them. They understand that they are in different classes than the affiliated students, but they are even in different dorms and cafeterias. Moreover, they discuss the class that Mr. Jang just made and then run the whole time. She is sad and says she didn't come here to be treated like this, and Jeonsgu thinks he must become affiliated somewhere, no matter what. Jiwoo calls them and says Mr. Jang probably has something in mind. They misunderstand him and say he acts nice and makes all of them the bad guys. Jeongsu says his awakened power might be strong, but he can't ignore their opinions. Jihai exclaims before coming to the academy. She learned a few things from the group that brought them there, and if people heard that they spent the whole class running, then they would laugh at them. Jiwoo again says there must be a reason, and they just need to stay calm. In the meantime, Subin and Jisuk appear there and ask why they are having lunch so late. Jiwoo asks them what they are doing there, and Jisuk replies they finished their class and got bored, so they dropped by. Subin observes that Wooin has eaten up all the food, and the other students are shocked that they not only know Jisuk of Shinhwa, but also know Subin Lee. On the other hand, In-hyuk meets Mr. Jang, greets him happily, and informs him about Mr. Park. Mr. Jang seems serious and asks him what Shinhwa and the Union are thinking. In-hyuk doesn't understand what he means and says he is talking about Wooin and Jiwoo. To him, they seemed like they were already affiliated with Shinhwa and the Union and had trained with those two groups. In-hyuk exclaims there is a long story regarding those two, but what he has said isn't true, and asks him if they caused any trouble. Mr. Jang tells him that Jiwoo refuses to do as he said on the first day of class, and In-hyuk asks him what he refuses to do. He tells him that he asked him what his awakened power is, but he refused to tell him and said he didn't want to disappoint the one who taught him to hide his awakened power even when asked. In-hyuk is shocked at this and remembers when he tells him that he can move really fast, so he asks him not to reveal his powers like that. He smiles at thinking Jiwoo didn't tell because of him, while Mr. Jang wonders what is wrong with him. The next day, Mr. Jang again asks them to run to the ground, and Jiwoo and Wooin run at full speed while the other students seem tired. After a few hours, Mr. Jang asks them to stop and appreciate them for their excellent work. He then asks them to eat their meal and get some rest. Ji-hai calls him and says she can't take it anymore, and all they have been doing for the past few days is running. She asks him how long they have to do this, and they don't come here to become runners. Gangwoo also supports him and says she is right, but he thinks it's unfair that they are treated differently than the affiliated students. Mr. Jang asks if they think it's unfair, and Ji-hai says even their menus are different, and they are also in different dorms and training facilities. They also have different classes taught to each class, although they only have one. She asks him if the academy cares about them all, and they don't know what they have come there for. Mr. Jang asks if they want special treatment like awakened ones, and Ji-hai replies that they just want to be treated equally as the other students. Mr. Jang stares at them and asks if they actually think that they are equal to them. He states that the whole program was created by the groups they are affiliated with, and each of those groups has a long history and a tremendous influence on this country, and the students that the guys are comparing themselves to are elites who were trained by those groups ever since they were little. He asks them about their background, and they all are quite satisfied with this answer. He says they are not better than them in any way, so he asks why they should be treated equally. He also asks them to leave if they are not happy with the academy's system or his teaching style. After some time, Jiwoo and Wooin eat their lunch, and Ji-hai says they are just gobbling down their food and have nothing to worry about. She exclaims they see really close with not only Jisuk of Shinhwa, but also Subin Lee of the Union, and when the academy's over, she bets they too will manage to join Shinhwa or the Union in one way or another. Jiwoo replies they are close friends, but that doesn't mean they can join Shinhwa or the Union just like that. Ji-hai doesn't seem to believe them, and Gangwoo says this means they have to keep running in class. Ji-hai is worried and says she can't waste her time like this, and the affiliated students are way ahead of them to begin with. Jiangsu calls them and asks them to stop whining, and like Mr. Jang said, they can't expect to be treated the same way. They should be thankful for being brought there, and she is surprised at his words. She asks why he is saying stuff like that, and she was doing just fine even before she came there, and she doesn't have to be hung up on this place like this. Jiangsu says they might have been extraordinary when they lived naively among ordinary people, but they can't be treated so, especially as awakened ones. He is at the point where they are lucky to be noticed by normal groups and asks what would happen if shady groups took them. Ji-hai doesn't understand and asks others what he meant by this, and he gets up, asking them not to get upset and to stay quiet. He walks away from there and thinks they don't do anything but complain. In the meantime, he is faced by a guy who slaps his face so hard. He said Jiangsu asked him to trust him, but all he has done is get on by those punks that Shinhwa and the Union brought. Jiangsu apologizes to him, and the boy kicks him and makes him fall to the ground. He asks him if he thinks an apology can solve everything, and if he knows how humiliated he was because of him. Jiangsu says there were awakened ones who were much stronger than he expected. and he replies they are only strong among losers like him. He warns him that if this ever happens again, not only will he be rejected from joining Baekdu, but he will kill him too. His name is Sechin, and his friends ask him why he bothers taking care of a moron like Jiangsu. He gets up and thinks this is nothing, and he will join Baekdu no matter what. On the other side, Mr. Zhang is informed about the sparring competition between affiliated and unaffiliated students, and a teacher says he heard his students complain a lot about not being treated equally. He exclaims that he already knew they would just ask for more instead of thanking the groups for bringing them there. Mr. Zhang says this is because they have just recently realized they are awakened. The teacher says they can go back to society as ordinary people, which will be good for them, and it's their job to teach them how hard it is to live in this world before it's too late. Mr. Zhang tells Mr. Kang that this is absurd, but he replies that all the other instructors already reached an agreement. He asks Mr. Zhang to prepare his students. On the other hand, Caden shows Jiwoo his cat punch, and he just got used to it. But that wasn't even everything he had. Jiwoo calls him and asks if he can hit him with that punch just one time. The next morning, they are again running in the class, and Mr. Zhang asks them to run as if they are draining out every last drop of their energy. They are hell tired, and Gangwoo thinks about how long they have to run and wonders why he is making them run much more than usual. They are shocked to see Wooin and Jiwoo running speedily and wonder how they are so full of energy every single day. After that, they get hell tired, and Mr. Zhang asks them to listen to them while they are catching their breath. He says it's earlier than he expected, but today, he will teach them something very important. He reveals he is going to teach them force control, and everyone is shocked at his sudden change. Jiangsu shockingly asks him if he is really teaching them to force control. He says he can teach them the lowest level of neutral force control, still knowing that makes a big difference. They will be able to use their awakened powers more efficiently and enhance them more rapidly, and they are still surprised that they can learn force control. Mr. Zhang remembers that when he talked about teaching them about force control, the other teachers resisted this, and he replied that they would eventually be affiliated with a group, so he didn't think teaching them force control would be a problem. The other one asks him if he is going to teach them Biko's force control, and he replies that he will teach them the lowest level of force control that is commonly known. The teacher is still against this and says they shouldn't break the rules that force control is not to be taught to unverified awakened ones. Mr. Zhang says that the rule doesn't exist, and he exclaims that the senior awakened made that decision to prevent any potential chaos that might happen when unverified awakened ones get too strong. Mr. Han asks them to stop arguing and approves the decision to teach them force control, but it has to be the lowest level of force control. At present, Mr. Zhang is teaching them and asks them to move their awakened powers just like the way he moves them. It won't be easy at first, so they don't need to rush themselves or focus on remembering how it feels with their body. He thinks it's hard to pick up immediately and probably hard even to remember the feeling left within the body. However, Wooin is different from the other kids and has already learned force control, as he expected. Jiwoo is also excited to learn another type of force control, and he asks Caden if it's okay to learn another type of force control. He allowed him to learn it unless it was something weird. Then, there wouldn't be much of an issue. He asks Caden if he knows another type of force control, and he replies that he knows, but it's not as good as his own, so he just doesn't use it. He says he will understand his meaning when he learns a different one. Mr. Zhang comes to him and asks him to close his eyes, and he can feel Mr. Zhang's energy moving within his body, which is clearly different from what Mr. Caden taught him. He is surprised to see there is another way of moving his power, and Mr. Zhang observes that Jiwoo also knows force control. He is shocked that Jiwoo learned his method with so much ease, and Jiwoo thinks it looks like Mr. Zhang is done and thinks to try it again from the beginning. Mr. Zhang is shocked and thinks if he knows this force control already, and if not, then the question is how he can pick it up so quickly and use it so easily. After class, the students are happy that they learned force control, and Jihai is also happy and says she misunderstood Mr. Zhang all this time. Jiangsu is also happy that he learned force control before he became affiliated with a group, and now he can use this to enhance his power faster. Gangwoo says it was difficult, and he thought he had a grasp on it when Mr. Zhang did it on his body, but he couldn't remember how it felt when he was on his own. Jiwoo thinks he should just keep eating because he feels telling them it was easy for him is wrong. Suddenly, Suchin appears there, and Jiangsu gets up and sees him, getting up out of his respect. He asks him if it is true that they are learning force control, and they are shocked when they hear that. Jiangsu says they learned it, and he asks Jiangsu if he also learned it. He slaps his face when he says yes. He starts hitting him with his food plate and asks how he dares to learn the method. He should have asked for his permission first. He hits him continuously and asks if he hasn't made it clear to report everything from A to Z to him clearly. Jiangsu apologizes to him and thinks he must bear with this to join Baekdu. Jiwoo calls him from a distance and asks him to stop hitting him. He says it's none of his business whether he learns force control or not, and it's none of his business. He comes to Jiwoo and asks who the hell he is to stick his nose into this, and his friend also asks how he brought a person like him there. Yi-hyuk reaches there and says Shinhwa has brought him there. He asks him if he has a problem with this. Suchin recognizes him, and Yi-hyuk comes to his friend and says Shinhwa brought Jiwoo and asks what he is going to do about it. Suchin comes to him and says Shinhwa has really brought up a troublemaker kid and thinks they didn't have much of a choice. He asks Yi-hyuk to educate him before bringing him there. Yi-hyuk asks him if he is looking down on Shinhwa. Suchon asks why he is overreacting and is not looking down on Shinhwa. He just finds this funny. He says he was teaching a lesson to the unaffiliated awakened one that they, Baekdu, brought, and the kid that Shinhwa brought is ordering him to stop. Jiwoo says he didn't order him, and this was not the way to teach a lesson. Jiwoo claims it is just bullying, and Suchin counter-questions him when he bullies him. He asks Jiangsu if he bullied him a moment ago, and he doesn't answer this. Suchin again asks if he bullied him, and Jiangsu replies he didn't bully him. Jiwoo is shocked at his answer, while others are just quiet and are watching them. Suchin asks Yi-hyuk to see that Jiangsu has no clue, but Jiwoo still sticks his nose into this. Yi-hyuk knows that Jiwoo is telling the truth, and what happened is obvious by looking at Jiangsu. He has no choice but to answer that way, and Suchin asks him to give him a hint of how things play out there. However, before he can say anything, Jiwoo asks him if he enjoys doing this. He seems shocked and asks him what he is talking about, and Jiwoo asks him if he enjoys bullying the weak just because he belongs to a powerful group. Suchin gets angry about this and asks Jiwoo if he wants to die, and he says he heard there is a tacit rule that existing awakened ones and groups should help newly awakened ones so that they can live a proper life as awakened ones. To keep this rule, the opportunity to be there was given to unaffiliated awakened ones like this, but instead of other kids in the groups. However, powerful groups like his did that for unaffiliated awakened ones like them who had nothing, but they are bullying them right now because they don't have that power. Everyone is quiet at his question, but Suchin shouts at him and says none of what he said is true. He is about to attack him, but Yi-hyuk comes in the way and says he is a kid Shinhwa brought, so he is not letting him lay his hands on him. He warns him again, and before he can say anything, Mr. Jang appears there and asks them to stop. He asks them what they are doing over there, and Suchin leaves the room quietly. He also asks Yi-hyuk and Boyang to return to their dorms. After some time, they are only left with unaffiliated kids. He then asks them to go back to their dorms and keep practicing the force control he taught them today. While leaving, he remembers what Jiwoo said to them because he was already there and listened to their conversation. He thinks Jiwoo understands the responsibilities that powerful awakened ones bear better than them. He then sees In-hyuk and Mr. Park there, and they ask him if he is done with his class. They hear that the kids will be sparring with each other. Mr. Park says they are saying it's to teach the unaffiliated kids a lesson, but their actual intention is to make them feel the difference between them and the affiliated kids. In-hyuk says they are doing it in there too, just like they do outside. However, he is happy that he is teaching them force control, even though the other instructors are against it. Mr. Jang asks them if they have nothing else to do, and In-hyuk says they have nothing to do. This is why he is considering teaching his class, and Mr. Jang is shocked at hearing this. Mr. Park adds and says he also has much free time and can teach his class, while Jang asks them not to disrupt the class. The same is true for everything. When they go to their rooms, Jiangsu calls them Jiwoo. He seems upset, and Wooan understands and leaves them there, saying he is going to his room. Now, the only two of them have left, and Jiangsu thanks him for what he did earlier. and he owes him this time. He also apologizes for being unable to be honest even though he stood up for him. However, if he faces the same situation again, he still won't be able to be honest because he has to join a group no matter what. Jiwoo smiles and says he understands his situation. They say goodbye to each other and go to their rooms. He goes to his room and jumps on the bed first while Kaden trains himself. He calls him and says it's difficult to live as an awakened one, and Kaden says it's somehow difficult and won't be easy, but he is glad that he is not alone anymore. The next morning, Wooin and Jiwoo are on the ground when Jeongsu comes there and seems really sad. Jiwoo says hi to him and asks if his practice force control was back in his room yesterday. Woo-sik also says hello, and their behavior seems better than before. Gangwoo also comes to him and asks if he got a good rest yesterday, and he is surprised that they are all being nice to him. Jiwoo thinks this is odd because they never said hello to him first. Jihai asks him why he is looking at them like that and says it was really uncomfortable when he acted in a friendly manner. Gangwoo also says he felt the same, and it looked like he was fake. Jiwoo apologizes to them and says he is not good at making new friends, but Gangwoo says he doesn't need to apologize because they don't think that anymore. From the way he stood up to the Baekdu kids yesterday, he could tell they weren't just pretending to be friendly, and it sure isn't easy to step in like that, even for him. Jihi says it changed their thoughts about him, and they all seem friendly all of a sudden. After a while, Mr. Jang appears there, and they wonder who the ones coming with him are. Mr. Park and In Hyuk came with them, and Jiwoo smiled after watching him. Mr. Jang announces that from now on, these two instructors will teach all of them with him, and they both introduce themselves. Mr. Jang says they will be able to learn a lot from them since they are not only affiliated with Shinhwa and the Union, but are also ranked as two of the top 20 awakened ones in the country. The students seem excited to learn from the top 20 awakened ones, and Jiwoo also gets to know that they are really very strong. In Hyuk says there is no need to be surprised by the two, and their instructor, Mr. Jang, is also one of the top 20 rankers like them. The students are shocked because they never knew this. Mr. Jang gets embarrassed, shouts at them, and asks them to run. When they are done running, Mr. Park asks them to do a handstand and says it's not just their awakened powers that they need to enhance, but they have to enhance their physical capabilities as well. Doing a handstand will help them improve their sense of balance and concentration. They all try to do handstands, but it is getting difficult for them. They are surprised that Jiwoo and Wooin are even good at this, too. After that, they are taught to use force control. At the same time, the other teachers don't like that In Hyuk and Senga are teaching unaffiliated students. A teacher asks Mr. Kang to do something because this is all happening because of Mr. Jang. He replies he doesn't understand how this is Jiwook's fault, and she says it must have been Mr. Jang who asked those two to teach the kids, and they have been close with each other for a long time. Mr. Kang is not happy and thinks Jang is causing trouble even there, and another teacher says he doesn't understand In Hyuk and Seongha either. The female teacher says this proves that Shinhwa and the Union are still looking down on them, and if not, then they wouldn't have made such a decision. On the other side, Yi-hyuk and Boyoung wander around unaffiliated dorms, and she asks him if they can see Jiwoo when they are already there. She is worried about him after what happened yesterday and asks him what would happen if he gets bullied by those Baekdu thugs. Yi-hyuk says they are somewhat responsible for what happened, so they should check them. Suddenly, they see Suchin and his friends there, and Boyoung asks them if they are again going there. He replies that it is none of his business, and Boyoung asks him if he is trying to bully the unaffiliated kids again. Suchin asks her to shut up and mind her own business and asks why she cares what they do. Yi-hyuk interrupts them and says he clearly warned him yesterday. Suchin asks them if they are out of their minds and if they are going to fight them just for those unaffiliated kids. He asks Yi-hyuk if he got permission from Shinhwa, and Boyoung thinks he is right because if they make a scene there, Shinhwa's going to get in trouble. Meanwhile, Jisuk reaches there and asks why they are blocking the way, and Boyoung thinks about something. She tells him that they picked on Jiwoo yesterday, and Suchin asks if that unaffiliated kid from Shinhwa is called Jiwoo. But before he can say anything, Jisuk hits him and makes him fall to the ground. He is shocked and asks what he is doing while Jisuk asks him to move out of his way. In the past, Jisuk's first appearance shocked everyone. He was the younger brother of Ji Young-yu, who everyone believed had the talent to advance Shinhwa the most. Although his talent and ability weren't as striking as his sister's, he was incomparable to others of his age. Everyone in Shinwa was shocked by how great the Yu family was, but Jisuk was a total jerk. He was the one who would fight anyone who got in his way, and even age didn't matter to him. Yi-hyuk thinks he never guessed that his bad temper could be so useful. They have always wanted to avoid Jisuk, but once in a while, he has proved to be helpful to them. Sachin gets up angrily and tries to kick him, but he dodges him again and pushes him back. He tries to attack him multiple times, but Jisuk grabs and kicks him again. He asks him how he dares to trick him and hits him from behind. He falls back to the ground and seems injured. Yi-hyuk seems very happy and thinks this is what he wants from him, and he knows how painful that is from his experience. Sachin's friends go to help him, while Jisuk says he forced him to use his knee kick reckoning. They think he has even named his kick, and this is so childish. However, Sachin gets up and is about to use his awakened power while his friends try to stop him. Jisuk also uses his awakened power and asks him to come to him. Boyoung and Yi-hyuk think fighting with awakened powers within the academy is strictly forbidden. If anyone breaks the rule, their groups will be held accountable. They think they have to stop him. Even Jisuk shouldn't dare cross that line. Suddenly, the teachers appear there and ask what they are doing, asking both of them to back off. The teacher calls Jisuk and asks if he wasn't clearly informed that fighting with awakened powers within the academy is forbidden. Yi-hyuk thinks he is siding with his group and is blaming Jisuk. Jisuk replies he hasn't used his awakened powers yet, and Boyoung supports him, saying Sachin tried to use his powers too. Sachin tells him that Jisuk attacked him first, and the teacher asks other students if Jisuk attacked first. He asks Jisuk why he attacked first, and he replies that Sachin picked a fight with him first. Sachin gets angry and asks what he is talking about, and Jisuk asks who is blocking this hallway and getting in his way. He tells him to move out of his way, but he ignores him, refuses to move, and asks Sachin's friends if they saw it too. He exclaims that he clearly told him to get out of the way so he could walk through and even wanted him to move, but he never did. The teacher asks the other students if Jisuk is telling the truth, and they answer yes. Jisuk says he ignored him, telling him to move and blocked him from getting in there. Yi-hyuk and Boyoung think he is shameless and smart when it comes to making excuses, and they guess he has had enough experience to get away with beating people up. Boyoung raises her hand and says Sachin also picked a fight with her while he shouts at her and asks when he did this. She starts crying and says she just told him not to bully the unaffiliated kids, but he got all mad and swore at her. The teachers, including Sachin, are shocked that he swore at her. She has tears in her eyes, and he calls her a bitch too, and the teacher asks him if he did that just because she told him not to bully the unaffiliated kids. Jisuk also calls him a crap, and the teacher asks his teacher how he will deal with this. He says they didn't fight with their awakened powers, so they should just let them off this time. Jisuk, Yi-hyuk, and Boyoung leave first, so the teachers ask others to go to their classes as well. She asks the teacher to pay more attention to their kids so that they don't have any trouble at such an important time. On the other side, they are tired of training, and Ji-hai says she can't move anymore. They didn't know Mr. Gu, and Mr. Park would also make them do such training. Ji-woo thinks about In-hyuk, and he tells him that he got a call from one of his men yesterday, and he said his cats are doing well. He tells him they are sleeping and eating well, and he misses them now. Ji-hai asks him whom he is missing, and if it's her girlfriend, and he tells her that he is missing the cats he lives with. She says they must be so cute, and Woo-sik tells him he wants to have a cat too, but he never has a chance to. Ji-woo tells them that his cats used to be stray cats, but he got close to them while feeding them, and they ended up living together. He says his cats are really cute, and he wants to see their pictures now, but they don't have their phones. Woo-in reveals that there is a cat in Ji-woo's room, and they are surprised at this and request that he show them the cat. After some time, they are shocked to see Mr. Caden and say he is just a cute cat, but he doesn't seem happy at their sudden encounter. The next morning, Mr. Han calls In-hyuk and Mr. Park and says there is a lot of talk about the two of them teaching the unaffiliated kids. In-hyuk replies he has also heard about the other instructors being unhappy about it, but they don't understand why. It's up to them whether to teach the unaffiliated students or not since they didn't come to the academy as instructors in the first place. Mr. Han says it is up to them, and if it weren't, he wouldn't be chatting with them like this. He would have ordered them to teach the affiliated kids instead of unaffiliated ones. In-hyuk says they have the right to decide on this matter, and he asks him to teach the affiliated kids instead of the unaffiliated ones. Their abilities are recognized even by Shinhwa and the Union, so he is sure that the affiliated kids can learn a lot. Mr. Park says they already have enough infrastructure and will learn a lot without being taught. On the other hand, the unaffiliated students only have Mr. Jang as their instructor, so he believes that teaching them is the right thing to do. Mr. Han asks them if he thinks that is a wise choice and if it is better to put their time and effort into the affiliated kids who have been verified rather than unaffiliated ones who are still in question. In-hyuk says after a while that he doesn't understand what he is saying because the unaffiliated students are the ones who actually need more training and help than anyone else. Still, Mr. Han says they are missing the point. He reveals that the academy is not like an ordinary school that provides equal opportunity for everyone, and it was created to make their awakened ones even stronger than they are now. Even at this very moment, the awakened ones around the world are enhancing their powers for their country and their group, so they don't have time to waste like this. In-hyuk says there is no reason to believe that only the affiliated students should be outstanding, and he is sure there are kids who can also become strong, awakened ones among the unaffiliated students. Mr. Han says talent is no respecter of persons and thinks he couldn't believe how strong he was when he met Caden in person and witnessed his abilities. He was strong enough to crush even those trained by the groups, which had accumulated vast amounts of data in their systems over the years. He again says they have no time to invest in such a gamble, and this is his request and suggestion as the principal of this academy and the highest senior in this country. He requests them to focus on the affiliated kids instead of wasting their time teaching the unaffiliated ones. They come out of his office, where Mr. Jang is waiting for them, and ask how their meeting with the principal went. In-hyuk says they only have 1 week, and there will be a test to evaluate the affiliated and unaffiliated students. If the unaffiliated ones fail to show something there, then they will no longer be able to teach them. Mr. Jang doesn't like how they will be treated will be decided by a single spar, and they are being given only a week to prepare for it. In-hyuk smiles and says he is glad that things turned out as they intended, and Jang asks him what he meant by this. He tells him that the spar could have ended without anything in return, but now there is a chance to change the way the unaffiliated kids are treated. He doesn't know how they will arrange it, but they have 2 cards up their sleeves and just need to make good use of them. Mr. Jang asks if they are talking about Jiwoo and Wooin, and he agrees that they are excellent, but they are not good enough to turn the tables. In-hyuk says they will be enough, but even Subin and Jisuk aren't able to defeat Wooin in a spar. Mr. Jang is shocked and says this doesn't make any sense, and says the only 2 kids who are comparable with Subin and Jisuk are Suchin of Baekdu and Gangseok of Biko. Mr. Park says Jiwoo is also strong and may not be as strong as Subin and Jisuk, but he has enough potential to be. In-hyuk tells him that when Jisuk sparred with Jiwoo, he let his guard down and got punched in the face, so that match ended as a draw. For his information, In-hyuk reveals that Wooin, Jiwoo, and Jisuk even fought with the Clean brothers, and they dared to start a fight and managed to survive until their chairwoman found them. He asks him if he still thinks Jiwoo and Wooin aren't good enough as game changers, while he is answerless at this. After some time, they go to the students, and Mr. Jang asks them to run as always, as if they are draining out every last drop of their energy. They follow him, and Mr. Jang asks Wooin and Jiwoo to follow them. He takes them to another ground and remembers what In-hyuk told them. He calls Wooin and asks him to stand in front of him, says he wants to see for himself how strong he is, and asks him to try to attack him. Wooin attacks him in just an instant, and he thinks he struck him as soon as he finished his sentence and would have embarrassed himself if he hadn't blocked it. He then asks him to attack him with something stronger, and Wooin releases his awakened power. Jang remembers Mr. Park told him that Wooin was well trained by his professor. He is now confirmed that his powers are comparable to Subin and Jisuk's. Wooin attacks him with his full power, while Mr. Jang uses his energy to block his attack, making it difficult to dodge him this time. Wooin asks him if he should continue because he can strengthen it, but Mr. Jang refuses and says this is enough. He then calls Jiwoo and asks him to show his strength. He asks him to attack him as much as he wants and not go easy on him as he did on his friends. Jiwoo reaches him in an instant and tries to attack him, but he dodges and says this isn't the fastest he can go. Jiwoo goes back and again comes to him, and this time, he is unable to predict his movement, and he attacks him from multiple places. He is shocked at his speed and tries to dodge his attacks, and this time, Jiwoo attacks him from the front. Mr. Jang is shocked, thinks this is insane, and wonders where these monsters came from. He now realizes why Seongha and In Hyuk said this is their chance. After that, they inform the students about their spar with the affiliated kids, and they are shocked as expected. Mr. Jang reveals the spar is in 6 days, and Woo-sik says they are no match for them. He asks him not to worry about who wins and who loses. What is important is that they have to do their best and show them what they are capable of. Ji-hai is still worried and says their abilities are far greater than theirs, and if their goal is to show off what they are capable of, then they should do it in another way instead of fighting them. Mr. Jang says she is not wrong, but what the Academy wants to see aren't some meaningless figures that can't be used in the field. They want to see what they can actually do in real combat situations, and depending on how much potential they show, their future might change. However, as of today, they will intensify their training until the day of the spar, and they will follow his lead. After that, they start running, and In Hyuk observes the kids seem confused, but Jang says they will have to get over it, or they will fall behind. After that, they train very hard with the teachers. At their lunch break, Ji-hai says this is insane because she barely gets used to the training and doesn't even have the strength to pick up her spoon. They are shocked that Jiwoo and Wooin are eating quietly, and they don't seem tired, too. Woo-sik is scared because they will be sparring with the affiliated kids in just 6 days. Ji-hai is also sure they won't go easy on them, and she asks Jiwoo and Wooin what they think about it. Jiwoo says he is also nervous, but he is just going to do his best, as Mr. Jang told them. Jeongsu says he is taking it easy, and for his information, the affiliated kids have been trained with the support of their groups since they were little. Jiwoo says there is nothing he can do about that. All he can do is try his best. He says he is also nervous and a little scared, but he was much more terrified when he was worried to death that people might find out about his power and harm his family. However, he doesn't need to worry about those things anymore, and he has all of them by his side, getting ready for the match together. They all get quieter after listening to him and think they just need to work hard. After that, he comes back to his room but can't find Mr. Caden there. He can see him walking on the ground through his window. He goes outside and asks him if he is done for the day. He walks because understanding his body better helps him enhance his fighting abilities. Jiwoo says it has been a while since they walked like this, and before they came there, they used to go for a walk almost every day to feed the stray cats. After a while, they can see a girl with a strange dog. He comments on the dog and says it is really big while the girl looks at his cat. She says his cat is too fat and asks him what he feeds him, but Jiwoo asks her what kind of dog she has, and he is very good looking. She ignores his question and asks if he is now walking his cat. She says seeing a cat walking with its owner is very interesting. However, she exclaims that the cat is too fat, making him look ugly, and Caden looks at her angrily. She talks to herself and wonders if she should take him, while Jiwoo seems surprised and asks what she is saying. She calls Caden, asks him to come to her, and says she will be his owner. Jiwoo and Caden wonder what she is doing, and he calls Caden to follow him, thinking she is such a weird girl. She calls him from behind and says she never said he could go. She uses her awakened power to call Caden toward her. Caden observes that she can control animals, and he seems to be affected by her. Jiwoo calls him from behind, but he walks toward the girl. Jiwoo is shocked at what is happening and why Mr. Caden obeys her. Caden walks to Jur, and when she is about to touch him, he poos on her hand and walks back. Caden thinks this little girl doesn't know her place, so she teaches her a lesson. The girl gets angry about this and thinks, how dare a mere cat ignore him, and she has never been humiliated by an animal like this before. She is determined to make him her cat no matter what. Caden wonders what this ominous feeling he is sensing. She comes to Jiwoo and asks him if he is one of the unaffiliated kids, and Jiwoo asks him how he knew about this. She says she hasn't seen him around, so it's obvious, and she is affiliated with a group. She says Jiwoo is being so proud of himself for being that cat's owner, and Jiwoo doesn't understand what she meant by this. She asks Jiwoo not to get on a high horse because that cat didn't come over to his. She asks his name, and Jiwoo tells her his name. She replies that she wasn't asking for his name, but asked about Cat's name. Jiwoo tells her that its name is casein nitrate, and she thinks he has a unique name and that she likes him so much. She introduces herself as Isol Ju from Mir and says he should join Mir, too. Jiwoo is shocked when she says she doesn't know why he stayed off their radar, but Mir is the right group for his power. She thinks Jiwoo has the power to control and commune with animals, and there is no other group more specialized in that than Mir. Seeing how her power doesn't work on his cat, she guesses his awakened power is very strong. She asks him to come and join Mir if he wants to get stronger and get better treatment. Jiwoo says there is a misunderstanding, but he doesn't have that kind of power. However, she thinks he is trying to hide his power. She exclaims that she has seen through him already, while Jiwoo says his power isn't what she thinks it is. She states that she is Mir's student representative, and she is so strong that an ordinary cat like him can't get away from her skill. Jiwoo wonders what he should do and says if he keeps denying it, then they might investigate Mr. Caden. She asks him to come join Mir when the academy is over, while Jiwoo thanks her for the offer and says he doesn't want to be affiliated with a group yet. She leaves him, calling him an idiot. After that, he asks Caden if there is an awakened power that can control animals, and he tells him that there are many awakened ones who can control animals. Jiwoo finds it really cool that there are so many different powers, and Caden says the animals are trained with the awakened power and used to attack or defend. Additionally, the best part about it is that they could be used to do things that people can't. In the past, their primary task was to acquire information. Since there are a lot of other ways to get their hands on information these days, so it's one of those powers that are in decline. Jiwoo says he should now tell others that he also has the power to control animals. Otherwise, Caden might be in danger. Caden asks him to tell them that it's one of his awakened powers and explains that because he is not in full control of it yet, then he can only communicate with him, not other animals. After that, they rush to their room because Caden feels hungry. The next day, the affiliated students are informed that they are going to spar with the unaffiliated kids, and Subin says there are only 6 of them. The teacher replied that they would also choose 6 students to participate in the spar. Jisoo raises his hand and says he wants to drop out of this match, and Subin also does the same. Yihyuk and Boyoung also follow them, and other students also refuse to participate. The teacher says only 6 of them can participate and asks them to leave the class. After that, Suchin comes to them, and sees Shinhwa and the Union are the best. They are all the very best. He says it should have been them fighting each other instead of those unaffiliated kids, and Subin says she will beat him well so he can quit speaking nonsense. Jisoo asks him if he will participate, and he replies that he won't miss a chance to beat those who don't know their place. Jisoo calls a student named Gangseok and asks if he is also going to participate in this match, and he replies that sparring with the unaffiliated kids won't help him in any way. On the other hand, their class is finished, and Mr. Jang asks them not to slack off and to practice force control when they go back to their rooms. Meanwhile, Miss Ko enters there and says it looks like the class is over in just a short time. She says she heard something very interesting from Isol, so she came to check it out. She also looks toward In-hyuk and Park, who don't budge an inch when she begs them to teach their student. She introduces herself as Mir's chaperone and instructor there. She asks who Jiwoo Seo is and asks him if he can control animals. Everyone is shocked to hear this, and she observes and asks if they don't know about his power. Surprisingly, In-hyuk asks if Jiwoo can control animals, and she replies that Isol had found out yesterday. He is shocked to learn that Jiwoo has another kind of awakened power, and the other students are also shocked and think he is so talented, and his super speed power is amazing in itself. She apologizes to him and says she didn't know he was keeping it a secret, and Jiwoo says he is not good enough to say he can control animals. He doesn't know why, but it only works on one cat, and it doesn't work on any other animals. Jihai asks him if he is talking about the cat he brought to the academy, and everyone is shocked that casein nitrate is the cat Jiwoo controls. Miss Ko asks him what kind of connection he has with that cat and if he is able to communicate with the cat, and Jiwoo replies that his skill is used for combat. Miss Ko asks him if he can make the cat fight, and he replies yes, he can make him fight. Miss Ko agrees and hopes that she can get a chance to see it later, while everyone is laughed at him. After that, when he goes to his room, He tells Kaden about today when an instructor from Mir asked him what kind of connection he has with his cat. He asks him what he told her, and he replies he used him for combat, and words just came out of his mind. Kaden is shocked at this, and Jiwoo apologizes to him and says that all he wanted to tell her was that his power only works on him, but she asks for more details and he panics. Kaden then says it's out of his hands now, and combat is the best excuse for him. After a while, he hears Subin's voice from the door. She is annoyed without their phones, and they have to come to his room and ring the bell to call him out. He opens the door, and Subin, Jisuk, and Wooin are outside. She asks him how he knew they were there, and he replies that they heard their voice. Jisuk says he asked Subin to keep her voice down, and she also made Wooin come out before they even rang the bell earlier. She blames Jisuk for his voice being louder than hers and asks Wooin to tell him who was louder in the hallway. Wooin replies he heard Subin's voice, and she is shocked at Hai, while Jiwoo says he also heard her voice. Jisuk calls her an idiot and says she doesn't even know how loud she is and calls her so shameless. She politely offers treats to Kaden. After that, he asks them if they heard the spar between them and the unaffiliated kids, and Jiwoo says their instructors told them a few days ago, and he doesn't know if that is why, but he also taught them force control. Subin says it's better than nothing, but a few days of knowing force control won't be enough to make a big difference. She also heard it's the lowest level of force control, and Jiwoo says the affiliated kids have been trained with a lot of support from their groups, so they must be strong. Subin says the kids there especially have been trained with special care by their groups since they were little. There is a big difference between getting systematic training from childhood and not. She says she is not worried about Wooin at all, but she is worried about Jiwoo, while Jisuk says she doesn't need to worry about him either. He tells her that Jiwoo once fought him and Wooin. Compared to them, other kids would be much easier. Moreover, Yijuk got owned by Jiwoo, and he was caught off guard, but it still counts. Subin appreciates him, saying he is stronger than he looks, while he says it was because Yijuk was off his guard, and Subin thinks there is no need to worry about him, too. Jiwoo is surprised that she was worried about him, and she changes the topic and says she just thought it would be too pathetic to see him get beat up. Jisuk says he doesn't know about the other unaffiliated kids, but they both need to watch out for Suchin and inform him that they are not participating in the spar. Jisuk says another kid is pretty strong, but he said he would pass, too, which means Susian is his strongest opponent. Jiwoo asks him who's Susian, and he replies he has met him before, and he also hears he made a scene at his cafeteria the other day. Subin is about to tell his awakened power, but Jiwoo refuses and says he doesn't want to know. He exclaims he wants to play fair, because they wouldn't know their awakened powers either. Suddenly, Jisuk observes that Subin has sat on Kaden's tail, and he is trying to get her off. He jumps on the bed, kicks Subin, and makes her fall from the bed. Everyone is shocked at his action, and she asks him why he hit him or if he wants to die. Jisuk angrily asks her how she dares to sit on the cat's tail, and Subin shockingly asks if she really did that. He shouts at her, saying she sits on the cat's tail, and Subin apologizes to Kaden and asks if he is hurt, while Jisuk thinks he has just saved her life from the cat. He then turns toward Jiwoo and asks if he wants him to help him out and if he can help him prepare for the match after the class. Subin says she will also help since she has nothing to do. Jiwoo thanks him and Jisuk says they have little time left before the spar. He asks them to go to the gym and get started right away. Jiwoo looks at them and remembers the time when he was all alone. Subin asks him why he is just standing there, and he asks them to go ahead, and he will catch up with them soon. When they left, Kaden was happy that they left early today, and he could observe that Jiwoo seemed sad. He then calls Kaden and says he has never been this happy in his life. He asks him to stop making him cringe and go after them. When he leaves, Kaden thinks he just won't let him stop worrying about him. After that, they reach the gym, and Subin is Jiwoo's opponent. She asks him not to be so nervous, and it's just a practice spar, and he tells her that his awakened power is super speed. Subin doesn't understand why he tells her his power, and Jiwoo says he has seen his power before, so she should know his power, too. Subin calls him an idiot and asks him to stop acting like this. After that, they are ready to spar, and Subin asks him why he is just standing there and asks him to attack first. Jiwoo is confused and asks if Ayat is okay for him to start, and he is worried and wonders what he should do because she doesn't seem ready to fight at all. Jisuk calls him and asks if he thinks Subin is weak just because she is a girl, and he declines. He tells him that he is hesitating because Subin isn't getting ready to fight, and Jisuk asks him not to think she is an easy opponent. He asks him to do his best, and Subin thinks he is right for once, but he might scare Jiwoo. He then calls Jiwoo and asks him to attack, and Jiwoo thinks he is too confident. He thinks Subin is known to be a strong, awakened one, and he can't go easy on her. He moves with his super speed, reaches her in no time, and punches her face. She is shocked and attacks her multiple times, and doesn't give her a chance to attack him back. Jisuk is enjoying all this and is getting happy after seeing her getting beaten up by Jiwoo. She calls him, asks him to stop, and asks why he is so fast. Jiwoo replies he already told her that his awakened power is super speed. Meanwhile, Jisuk is laughing loudly and says he knows that she will get kicked out when she lets her guard down. He asks her if she seriously thinks she can beat him just standing there without using her power. He calls Jiwoo and appreciates him for his brilliant attack. Subin is shocked and asks him if he pretended to be all serious about this, and he calls her an idiot and says she realized it too late. Jiwoo tells her that her nose is bleeding, and Jisuk laughs at her and says she can only get a bloody nose for acting all tough. She creates ice and tries to attack him, but he dodges her attack and also makes fun of her. They start fighting while Jiwoo is watching them seriously and is worried that they are fighting because of him. The next morning, they are running in the class and doing exercise. After that, they take their lunch and do the same things alternatively and try to practice for the spar. A few days later, Ji-young comes to visit the academy and goes to see Mr. Han and says she has come there to pay her respects to him as the academy's principal. Mr. Han exclaims he is just a retired old man and he doesn't deserve such respect from her, the strongest awakened one in the country. Ji-young says he was the strongest awakened one until he retired, and Mr. Han says now he has met her himself, and he can see that her title isn't an overstatement. Finally, the day of spar has arrived, where the affiliated and unaffiliated awakened ones are facing each other. They are whispering that they look so scared, and it seems like they will cry like babies anytime soon. Isol is also watching Jiwoo and turns her face. Mr. Jang orders them to stand in order, and they are surprised to see Suchin in the spar. Even Woonyoung, the student representative of Hala, is participating. Suchin wants to fight Jiwoo, but he is going last. He calls Mr. Jang and asks if he can go at last, but he replies the order has already finalized this morning. A teacher exclaims a little change wouldn't hurt, but Mr. Jang asks him what was the point of exchanging the roster this morning. He gets angry on him and thinks he can't do anything, and he has got on strings to pull there. Woo-in calls him and says he is okay with it, and Jiwoo also agrees to this, and the teacher smirks and tells Mr. Jang that the kids are okay with this. They then agree to put Suchin on last, and he honors Jiwoo saying he will be dead meat now. They first call Woo-sik of unaffiliated and Sui Chu of Hala into the ring. Woo-sik remembers when Mr. Jang asked him to give up since his power can be used for combat, but it's more of a non-combat power, considering his personality and tendencies. However, he replied that he still wanted to give it a try. He exclaimed that he was an awakened one, and as one, he should be prepared for any kind of situation he might get into. He is terrified and just wants to give up, but he doesn't want to run away without even trying in front of them. He is ready to fight while his opponent jumps, and he predicts her attack, which is a left foot kick. He moves at the right time and dodges her, but she moves swiftly and attacks him again with her full might. Jiwoo and the others are shocked to see this. He thinks he read her move but wasn't quick enough to dodge it. He thinks he is so pathetic that he can't move from that single kick. He looks toward Woo-in and thinks he will be fighting with the student representative of Hala, the group his opponent is in. The girl asks the teachers what she does now since it seems like he passed out. But Woo-sik gets up again, asks why she kicked him and asks her to use her awakened power. He thinks he needs to make her use her awakened power so Woo-in will have a clue of what power his opponent will use. The girl asks him to know his place and says she is going easy on him, but he asks her to use her power and attack him. She then uses her awakened power, and Woo-sik thinks this is Hala's trait, and they make their awakened power into a sphere to attack. She attacks him with the sphere, and it directly hits his face and makes him seriously injured. Others are shocked at his condition, and he looks toward Wooen with inquiring eyes if he noticed this. Wooen nods his head, and Woo-sik is happy that he did something for him. They announce the winner, Sui Chu, from the affiliated kids. Next up is Jukyeon Kim of Mir and Gangwoo Choi of the unaffiliated, and he thinks the girl is stronger than she looks. Instead of taking a long time to win, he thinks of pouring everything out at the beginning and showing them what he is capable of. As soon as the bell rings, he jumps upon the girl and hits him. He is happy that his plan is working and attacks her multiple times. He thinks she is weaker than he thought, or maybe he is stronger than he thought. Suddenly, he opened his eyes and realized it was just a dream. Ji-hai asks Ji-woo why he is standing there, and he thinks she is controlling his mind if this has something to do with her awakened power. He tells others that her power is mind control, and he remembers Isol said that Mir can control and communicate with animals, but he wonders if they can do this to humans too. Mr. Jang thinks she is using hypnotizing, and this is Mir's style of attack. In a worst-case scenario, it can even drive the person crazy, and Gangwoo isn't skilled or experienced enough to free himself. He tries to attack him, but it's not working, and then he finds himself in a space and can't find the girl there. After that, he can feel himself falling from a building, falls to the ground and becomes unconscious. They announce the winner, Jukyeon Kim, while the teacher smiles and says he saw this coming, but it is way too easy. Next up is Hyunga Park of Baekdu and Ji-hai Lee of the unaffiliated, and she thinks she is the last person she wants to fight with. She calls him and asks if they have met before, and Ji-hai attacks her as soon as the bell rings. But Hyunga dodges her attack and rushes toward him, saying the way she stretched out her hands is so obvious and that this can't work with her. She punches her with her power and makes her fall. He then asked her not to go down already, it was just one punch. However, Ji-hai grabs her in her bubble, calls her an idiot and asks if she thinks she will make her movements so obvious. Suchin thinks she was so stupid to fall for that attack, and Ji-hai says she will make sure to drop her from way up there. Hyunga releases her awakened power and says she can't do that with this lousy skill, and Ji-hai can't lift her any higher because of her power. She increases the weight of the bubble and is coming down. Soon, she reaches her and pops the bubble, saying she is too weak to hold her up. Suddenly, Ji-hai falls to the ground, and her body feels so high. Mr. Jang thinks Ji-hai's only method of attack is to drop her opponent from up high, but that doesn't work with Baekdu's gravitational interference. Hyunga smiles and says she bets it's hard to even breathe under that pressure, and she keeps her feet on Ji-hai's face and asks how she dares to mess with her. Ji-hai says she gives up, but she doesn't move. She says sparring isn't a joke, and she kicks her and is about to kick her again. Ji-woo calls her and asks her to stop. Ji-hai has already given up, so why is she trying to attack her even more? Suchin calls him and asks who gave him the right to step in, and they are in the middle of a match. Ji-woo replies he clearly gives up, but her opponent is trying to attack her again. Suchin asks him if he doesn't know that they are not allowed to interfere with a match, no matter what. He humiliates him and says this clearly shows why the unaffiliated kids are below them. The teacher also doesn't like Ji-woo's attitude and says he is clueless, even for an unaffiliated one. Mr. Jang apologizes to him and says it's all his fault that he didn't teach the kids about the rules. He asks him how he can't teach his students something so basic. And Hayek remembers Mr. Jang saying it's better for the kids actually to experience than for them to teach them everything since the groups won't be so kind to them. Mr. Jang calls Ji-woo and says he shouldn't interfere in the middle of an official spar like this one. And that includes not only physically intervening by jumping into the ring, but also any form of interference like what he has just done. Ji-woo is at the point where Ji-hai clearly says she wants to give up, yet her opponent keeps attacking her. The teacher says once he is in the ring, his forfeit is only accepted when it is obvious that he is no longer able to fight. Susian also adds and says sparring with another awakened one is never a joke and asks him if he really thinks he can just end it by yelling at him wanna give up. Ji-woo gets quiet at this, and Mr. Jang apologizes on Ji-woo's behalf. He says this is the first official spar for those kids and requests him to hook up this time. The other teachers also support Mr. Jang and ask him to forgive them this time. After that, they announce the winner, which is Hyunga Park. Next up is In-young Ka of Baekdu and Jeong-soo Lee of the unaffiliated. Jeong-soo thinks there is too much difference between his strengths and his, and he should focus on presenting what he can do as much as he can. In-young calls him and says he is so lucky to meet him as his opponent, but he will go easy on him since their group brought him there. Jiangsu thinks that Baekdu's skill is gravitational and puts strong pressure on the opponent based on what he saw in the previous match. He thinks about approaching him quickly so he doesn't get crushed under his power. The bell beeps, and Jiangsu rushes toward him to attack immediately. Mr. Zhang thinks his idea isn't bad, but he lacks in powers. In-young reaches him in no time, and he doesn't plan to attack him with his awakened power in the first place. He kicked him, and that was just a simple kick, but it came in really strong. He guesses there's too much difference in the physical ability. Jiangsu has no option but to ramp up his awakened power and hold out as long as possible. In-young beats him badly and says he is taking it all pretty well, and Jiangsu observes that he has let his guard down. He then gets up and kicks him back while Suchin wonders why he is attacking back. In-young says he was going to go easy on him, but he lost his chance and hit him at some distance. He then uses his gravitational awakened power, and Jiangsu can feel his weight so high that he cannot even move. He then lifts him up in the air and throws him back with his full might. Jihai thinks it looks similar to what she does, but it's totally different. Jiangsu feels much faster and harder. In-young smiles, lifts him again in the air, and hits him back. Everyone is shockingly watching them, and Jihai thinks this is not a spar, but they are just bullying the weak and can't do anything. Jiangsu was very injured, and they announced that the winner would be In-young Ka of Baekdu. Jihai starts crying and asks why they have to go through this. Mr. Han and Ji-young are watching them on the screen, and he says they promised to show what the unaffiliated students are made of through this spar, but he guesses it was just a waste of time. After that, they call Woon-young Kai of Hala and Wooin of the unaffiliated. He calls Ji-woo and Jihai and asks them to keep their heads up and watch, saying that this one will be worth watching. After that, the opponents face each other, and Woon-young is yawning when the bell rings. Wooin attacks first, and they are shocked by his power of attack. He gets angry with him and uses his awakened power, while Wooin also uses his awakened power and is ready to attack. The teachers are also shockingly watching them, and Woon-young covers himself with his awakened power and tries to create a sphere of his power. But everyone is shocked to see Wooin break his power sphere, and Suchin wonders how someone can be as strong as him. Jisuk smiles and says he hasn't changed a bit, and he asks him to show them what he has got. After a while, Woon-young is seriously injured but still has the power to attack him. He gathers his power and creates many spheres out of his awakened power, throwing them all toward Wooin. Wooin dodges his attacks and changes the ball's trajectory to deflect the attack. He hits the ball with Woon-young's leg and feels so much pain in it. Before he can attack him again, Wooin blows him with his last attack, and with this, they announce the winner, who is Wooin from the unaffiliated. The affiliated kids are shocked that Woon-young of Hall lost to an unaffiliated kid and went down before he could even move. Wooin returns and asks Ji-woo and Jihai if it is worth watching, and Ji-woo thumbs up for him. They both are crying with tears in their eyes, but this time, they are tears of joy. Mr. Zhang observes that Wooin dominated Woon-young through strength and control over his awakened power and combat skills. Miss Ko is shocked and says she can't believe what she just saw, and they wonder how an awakened one as strong as him stays under the radar for so long. From what he showed them, it's clear that he is one of the top students in the academy. Yi-hyuk and Boyoung are shocked to see him and instantly wonder where he came from. The strongest student thinks if he had participated in the spar, he would have been able to fight him. Mr. Han is also impressed by him and says he didn't expect such a strong, awakened one among the unaffiliated students, and it looks like he was the card Mr. Zhang had up his sleeve when he made that offer. He tells Ji-young that Zhang asked him to give the unaffiliated students as much support as the affiliated ones if they showed enough potential in this spar. She asks him if the unaffiliated students will be supported equally from now on, and she replies that Wooin indeed has a remarkable talent, but it would be a waste to invest in all the others. On the other side, all the teachers look toward Mr. Park and say the union has brought him to the academy. After that, they call Suchin Kang of Baekdu and Ji-woo Seo of the unaffiliated, and he asks them to wish him luck. Boyoung asks Yi-hyuk if he thinks Ji-woo will be able to turn the tables, and he replies that he is going against Suchin. He is really strong, so Ji-woo has a slim chance of winning against him. Suchin is happy to see him because he wants his revenge for the insult, and Ji-woo thinks Suchin is as strong as Jisuk and Subin. Sachin makes fun and asks what is the look on his face, or if he really thinks he can do what his friend did. He releases his awakened power and says he was surprised by his Wuin's power, too, but there are not many awakened ones who can do that, and he is sure that Jiwoo is not one of them. He brags and says he is the Sachin Kang of Baekdu, but he is not on the same level as Wunyoung of Hala. They are ready to fight, and Mr. Jang thinks this is bad. Unlike Wunyoung, Sachin is ready to use his awakened power from the very start. He guesses the previous match taught him a lesson. As soon as the bell rings, he uses his awakened power to attack Jiwoo, but is shocked to see that he disappears in front of him using his awakened power. He then reaches him suddenly and punches his face with his full might. However, before he can punch him the second time, he uses his awakened power and pushes Jiwoo back. Jiwoo's body feels heavy all of a sudden, and the teachers are shocked and think the unaffiliated kid is so fast that they lose him. They believe his power must be super speed. Mr. Jang thinks Sachin reacted quickly, and Jiwoo's attack wasn't ineffective because Sachin never let his guard down. Sachon says he would have humiliated himself if he let his guard down like everyone else did and uses his awakened power to think he would kill him. Jiwoo's body is getting heavier, and he is unable to move. He wonders if this is the Baekdu's power that he saw in the earlier match. Sachin admits that he is pretty fast and asks if this is where he got his confidence to act up, and he uses his power to ask how he dares to hit him. His energy is pressing Jiwoo down, which is getting painful for him. Sukon asks him why he is struggling so much and asks him to use his incredible power to free himself. He asks if this is all he has, and he is giving up already. He smiles and says it looks like he has nothing else to show, so he will show him something fun. He lifts him up high in the air and throws him back to the ground. Sachin calls him again and asks why he isn't answering him, and Jiwoo seems really injured. Sachin again lifts him up in the air, hitting him against the wall with all his force. He then takes him near and asks him to answer, but Jiwoo seems injured and cannot talk. The teacher smiles, says he wants to see his power more, and says his speed is faster than expected, but it looks like that is all he can do. Sachin attacks him again and says he will probably feel like his whole body is being crushed, and this is because it is getting crushed. Wooin and Jihai are shocked to see his condition, and others also seem worried about his condition. After that, Sachin says he forgot to pay him back for the punch and punches his face with his full might. He says one punch won't make them even, and he is worth so much more than him. After that, he punches him multiple times, and the teachers are just shockingly watching them. Jihai asks Wooin if Jiwoo can't give up like he did and why he isn't giving up. Wooin remembers Mr. Jang told them that the academy would support the unaffiliated students more or less depending on how much potential they all show in the upcoming spar. He told them that the other 4 students in his class don't stand a chance of winning against the affiliated kids, and it would be best for them to try their best and show what their powers can do. But that is not the case with the 2. He says if they manage to show them what they are really capable of, then they will be able to change the impression of the unaffiliated students as a whole. Mr. Jang apologizes to him and thinks he has burdened him too much, and he can give up now because his opponent is too strong. However, Jiwoo thinks he won't give up, and he remembers Kaden told him that in a fight between awakened ones, he will always get a chance as long as he doesn't give up. That can obviously be when his opponent lowers their guard, but it can also be when they take a breath or get ready to use their powers. He thinks he has a chance as long as he doesn't give up, and he remembers all of his friends and thinks they still have a chance. Sachin is about to punch him again and asks how dares an unaffiliated punk like him tries to mess with him. He hits him repeatedly, and Jiwoo observes that he lets down his guard a little, is out of breath, and has a tell when he uses his power. He plans to use all of his abilities and escape his awakened power, and after that, when Sachin is about to attack him, he is shocked to see that he has disappeared in front of him. The teachers also open their eyes in shock, and Sachin wonders how he escaped from his awakened power. He then gets up again and is ready to fight him. The other kids wonder how he got himself out when Sachin was pressing down on him with his awakened power. They wonder if he is hiding his powers, and Subin also exclaims that Jiwoo is even stronger than he was at their practice. Isol is shocked and thinks he has the power to commune with animals, but he has also another power which is quite strong. Kaden is also watching this and thinks it was more by luck than skill. but he actually managed to find a weak point and escape. He was the one who taught him that, but he didn't expect him to pull it off so soon. Miss Ko thought Wuan was enough of a surprise, but Jiwoo was also amazing, and that 2 students from the unaffiliated group were beyond their expectations. Suchon wonders why everyone is yapping around, and it is nothing against him. Mr. Jang thinks Jiwoo has done enough, and he has shown everyone the potential the unaffiliated awakened ones have. He calls him from behind and says he can give up now. Suchon thinks he can't end it there after all this humiliation, and he is not a sparring partner just to test his combat abilities. Jiwoo refuses and says he can do it, and can fight to the end. Mr. Jang says he will get badly injured if he continues, while the other teacher calls him and says his student has a strong will to continue and asks him not to discourage him like that. He thinks Suchon is the future leader of Baekdu, and he must not tarnish his reputation like this. Isol thinks he should give up because he is pretty injured already. Suchon thinks it is his last chance to give up, and now he will beat the hell out of his so he knows his place. He gathers so much power this time and says he will crush his whole body. He moves upward in the air and tries to attack him while Jiwoo moves with his super speed and dodges all of his attacks. He reaches him and is about to attack, but Suchon saves himself and pushes him behind. Suchon spread out his power, and he will get trapped if he steps in there. He then smiles and asks him to attack, and with this, he spreads his power to the surrounding. Jiwoo moves with super speed to dodge him, and thinks he needs to get close to attack him. But that would put him inside the boundary of Suchon's awakened power. He asks him if he really thinks he can get in there, and Jiwoo wonders what he should do now. Suchon steps forward and asks if he realizes the difference between him and his power, while Jiwoo wonders how he should approach him. He remembers Kaden told him that in his last fight with Jisuk, he unleashed all of his energy at once and got lucky enough to win. But he teaches him a different thing, and says if he can move at his maximum speed for 2 seconds, then cut it down to 1 second. He asks him to speed up to the point where he uses only a second or less, and says fast speed isn't just about moving, and the faster he is, the stronger his impact energy is. He asks him to focus all of his energy there and use that to strike. Once he is able to do this, he will have an offensive skill that no one can trifle with. Jiwoo decides to use that skill, and Suchon asks what he thinks will happen if he gets close to him and reaches him. Jiwoo thinks his power isn't focused on one spot, but it's spread out, and he will punch a hole into that power. He moves with his maximum speed, uses the power of electricity that Mr. Kaden taught him, gathers it around his hand, and thinks to get through there. He then makes a crack in Suchon's barrier and lands a successful punch to him with all of his power. He hits Suchon and makes him fall at a great distance. Everyone is shocked at his speed and wonders if they just missed his move, and Mr. Jang knows that everyone there missed Jiwoo's move. Suchon is badly injured, and they announce the winner as Jiwoo Seo. The affiliated kids are astonished that an unaffiliated kid beat Suchon, and Jisuk and Subin think he really was a strong hero in disguise. Jiwoo is about to fall when Wuan supports him and saves him from falling. Mr. Jang appreciates them and says all of them have shown the potential that unaffiliated awakened ones have. He especially thanks Jiwoo and Wuan. Meanwhile, Gangseok is shocked to see Wuan and Jiwoo Seo of the unaffiliated and wants to spar with them. Mr. Kaden smiles and thinks he sure made it into his own skill, and leaves the gym. Mr. Han is also watching them and asks if he is the student Shinhwa brought, and she states this country has a bright future ahead, not because of a group leader like herself, but because of the potential that such students have. She gets up and says she will get going now, while Mr. Han just watching her quietly. The next morning, Mr. Han is informed about Jiwoo and Wuan, discovered 6 months ago, and they go to the same school. Their past whereabouts and close acquaintances match the data that the Union and Shinhwa submitted, and Wuan had a professor who taught him since he was little, and there are signs of someone teaching Jiwoo as well. Miser Han already expected that they both had mentors, and they couldn't be so strong if they hadn't learned force control. He asks his secretary if he has identified their mentors yet, and he replies that the Union is keeping it a secret while Shinhwa is still figuring it out. However, they said they investigated thoroughly enough to rule out the possibility of Wuan and Jiwoo being spied on, and their investigation is also underway, so they will have the results soon. Mr. Han is surprised that the Union and Shinhwa caught them by surprise, and they were planning to take this opportunity to keep those two groups in check. Still, now even the unaffiliated awakened ones that they recommended are standing out as well. He also remembers that Jiwoo used the power of electricity in a very unique way, and it reminds him of Kaden. On the other side, when Jiwoo wakes up, he finds himself in his room, and Mr. Kaden sits beside him. He asks him if he feels alright, and he replies that he has some pain here and there, but feels much better now. He tells him that he has been asleep for 3 days, but it's not a surprise because it's common for awakened ones to do that when they overuse their powers. Kaden appreciates him and says he did a good job, and Jiwoo asks him if he watched him fight. He didn't know he could really pull that off, and when he managed to escape Suchin's power, he used that skill in the end. Kaden says it was earlier than he expected, but in a way, it's natural because he is the one who taught him. Kaden brags and says that the great Kaden has taught him should have been a piece of cake for him, and Jiwoo totally agrees with him. After that, they look at each other for a while and laugh loudly. After a while, Kaden asks him to go back to training, picture the match in his head, and go through it again and again, and this will help him improve. Someone knocks at his door, and Kaden tells him that since he fell asleep, the kids have been visiting him every day at this hour. They are worried about him and wonder if he is still sleeping, and Woo-sik says the instructors told them that awakened ones fall into a deep sleep when they use up all their energy. Ji-hai is worried because it has been 3 days already, and they are surprised when Jiwoo opens the door. They are very happy to see him, and Ji-hai hugs him excitedly. Gangwoo asks him when he woke up, and if he is feeling okay now, and Jiwoo replies he just woke up and feels a little weak, but other than that, he is fine. He asks them about their conditions, and they reply that they were treated right away, so they are okay. Jeongsu is watching him and says he heard about his match and that he beat Suchin. He figured he and Wooin were strong when they were in class, but they never imagined the two of them would be that strong. Gangwoo also appreciates him and says he wishes he had seen him while fighting, and Ji-hai brags and says she saw the match with her own eyes, but she still can't believe it. Jiwoo claims he was just lucky, unlike Wooin, and Jeongsu thinks he never got on a high horse like the others, even though he had such a strong power. On the other side, the teacher tells Suchin that the chairman seemed very disappointed when he heard about his match. He tries to console him and asks him to get stronger. The chairman, his father, would want that. The next day, when he comes to the cafeteria, the students whisper after seeing him and comment that he has recovered now. His friend shouts at them and asks what they are looking at, and he asks them to get their meals and leave the place. He sits on a chair and feels so much pain, and thinks he is in a mess, and his body still aches all over. He remembers Jiwoo hiding that power the whole time and wonders how he is still unaffiliated. Meanwhile, Jisuk comes to him and asks if he is okay, and he is shocked at him asking about his health. He repeats his question and asks if he is okay since he got discharged today. Suchin wonders what is wrong with him, or if he is apprehensive about him or has something in his mind. Jisuk then exclaims that he got punched by Jiwoo before, and it hurts like hell. The others are shocked that Jisuk also fought Jiwoo once. Gangseok also watches them, and Suchin asks him if he has fought with Jiwoo. Jisuk smiles and admits that he has fought him before, but he won the match. Suchin feels so humiliated, and Jisuk leaves him, asking him to take care of himself. Subin and Jisuk laugh at him and leave him there while Boyoung and Yihyuk try to hide their smiles. On the other side, at the teachers' meeting, the teacher resists that they all started on the wrong foot. Although Wooin and Jiwoo were classified as unaffiliated, they have been trained more systematically than most affiliated students. And Hyuk asks him what the problem is with that, and it is important that they aren't affiliated with any group. Mr. Jang explained that he didn't understand the problem there and that people with the same characteristics were also classified as unaffiliated in the past. The teacher asks him how it is not the same now, and Miss Ko also agrees that there is no problem. Mr. Kang also supports them and says there is not much of an issue, and they have seen many unaffiliated awakened ones with mentors before. Miss Ko adds that she wants to take this opportunity to test out Jiwoo's ability to commune with animals. All the teachers are shocked to know that he has the ability to commune with animals, too. She replies that, based on what he showed, she doesn't expect this power to be outstanding, but she is still curious as to how good he is. On the other side, Jisuk and Subin fight each other and pull each other's hair while Mr. Kaden smiles with a devil's face. The next morning, Mr. Jang and In Hayek go to see Jiwoo and ask him about his health. He replies he still has some wounds left to heal, but other than that, he is alright. In Hayek tells him that everyone in the academy is talking about how he knocked down Suchin, and the teachers are confused as well. Jiwoo says he got lucky, and In Hayek says luck is part of the game fights between awakened ones, but still, it's true that he was able to win because Suchin let his guard down. In Hayek thinks he knows he doesn't have to worry about Jiwoo getting on a high horse, and he is still very modest and has an accurate understanding of the match. Mr. Jang asks him about the electrical power that he used at the end, and it seems like he already knew he had that power, and it was a wise choice to use it at the very end. They are there not just to check on his condition, but also to tell him the news, and he reveals that from now on, unaffiliated students will be as equally educated as the affiliated ones. The principal has approved it, and the classes will begin in a few days. Mr. Jang says this won't change everyone's perceptions in An's instant, but it will be an opportunity to improve them. This is all thanks to Wooin and Jiwoo, and they really appreciate it. However, Mr. Jang says they are going to test his power to commune with animals tomorrow, and it's just a formality, so he doesn't need to feel too pressured. Since his performance was beyond expectations, the teachers just wanted to see how strong his other powers were. Jiwoo is worried and wonders what he will do in this regard, and Mr. Jang tells him that Miss Ko from Mir will also be there, so he will be able to see exactly how strong his power to commune with animals is. He heard the animal he could communicate with was the fat cat. He then asks other students what they think about Jiwoo's cat since they have all seen that. They replied that they had seen him when they went to Jiwoo's room. He asks them if the cat seems capable of fighting, and they tell them that he is just a stout cat. He now observes why the kids describe him that way and thinks that even if Jiwoo can't make the cat fight properly, it won't matter since his other powers are excellent enough. The same evening, Jiwoo asks him what they should do, but he doesn't think they will test him on that. Kaden replies they will just have to pretend like he really has that kind of power. Meanwhile, Isol is following him and thinks he looks like he is better now. She feels no matter how she looks at him, he seems so gentle, but he's actually strong enough to beat Suchin. She observes his movement and thinks he is so handsome when the air touches his hair, and it flies in with it. Suddenly, Kaden tells him that that kid has been watching them for some time, and Jiwoo recognizes her as she is Isol. When she gets caught by him, she starts walking backward, and Jiwoo thinks she is just weird. The following day, all the teachers came to him and asked if that cat was the animal he could commune with, and if combat was his special ability. They are surprised at how he can make this cat fight, and Miss Ko asks him if there is anything else he can do with the cat. He replies that he is only able to communicate with him to some degree, and he can't make him do just anything, but combat is the best thing he can make him do. They start the test, and Miss Ko asks him if he can tell the cat to provide the information about what is beyond the wall. They then perform many tests and observe that the cat can't do that much, and now they will test its special ability, which is combat. She asks Jiwoo not to get embarrassed, and this happens often when the awakened one gets too nervous. There seems to be little point in doing other tests, so they get right to it and test the cat for combat skills. Mr. Seong calls him and asks if it is really true that he can really commune with animals, or if he just lied to get attention since it looks cool to have multiple awakened powers. Miss Ko tells him that Isol was the one who found out about his power, and it wasn't Jiwoo who brought it up in the first place, and he says he may be making everything up after hearing her say that. He is at the point where the cat isn't reacting at all, even to simple tests, and it seems to him that Jiwoo doesn't have the power to commune with animals. In Hayek supports him and says Jiwoo is not the type of person who would lie about such a thing, and he replies they found out Jiwoo has the power to commune with animals just recently and asks him not to act like he knows everything about him. He asks them permission to do the last test. Jiwoo tries to stop him and says this isn't necessary, but he insists that it would be better for him to test himself and clear up his doubts. The teacher seems confused, but he says there is no need to worry, that he won't go too hard on a mere cat, and that he will only defend without using his power. He then turns toward Kaden and asks him to say meow, but he just stares at him. He has clear intentions to kill the cat and will pretend this to be an accident. However, everyone, including him, is shocked when Kaden punches his face. He then jumps upon him and attacks him multiple times while he is unable to free himself. He is furious at him and thinks how he dares to glare at him with that look. He hits him with his pretty strong kitty punches, and he feels so much pain that he can see his ancestors, who are calling him to come over to them. Jiwoo grabs Kaden and tries to stop him, but he is so angry at him that he resists trying to beat him again. Mr. Seong falls to the ground and seems very injured, while the other teachers are just watching them surprisingly. After that, he asks Kaden why he did that, and he says he would go easy on him, but he stays quiet. He again calls him, and Kaden replies he is going to do it easy on him, but he can't stop himself when he sees that ferocious look on his face. He tells Jiwoo that he is trying to kill him, but he says he can't do that since the other teachers are watching. Kaden says he saw it in his eyes, and he probably thought he could get away with killing him by disguising it as an accident, and just thinking of his plan pissed him off. He then brags about his kitty punch and says it is pretty useful, and Jiwoo says things got out of their hand and what they should do now, and Kaden asks him to just go with the flow, and worrying doesn't change anything. He missed a nap because of that test, and now he is really sleepy, so he asks Jiwoo to let him sleep. Jiwoo again asks him if Mr. Seong will be alright, and he replies that he punches him without using his awakened power, so he is sure he will not be hurt too badly. Jiwoo is relieved about it, and In Hyuk reveals that Mr. Seong has 4 broken teeth, a broken nose, and a fractured skull. They are worried about him, and a teacher says he is sure Mr. Seong is a strong, awakened one. Mr. Seong is able to withstand attacks to a degree without needing to protect his body with awakened power, yet he is hurt so badly. Mr. Kang asks Miss Ko if small animals like that cat can have such strong combat power. She states that it's not possible, and there are awakened ones who enhance the abilities of the animals they commune with and fight battles together. However, this is very difficult, so they can only work with one animal with whom they have achieved the highest level of communion. Because it's so hard, they don't usually choose a small animal for combat. Anyway, it's still possible for a cat to fight like that, and she has never seen such a thing in person either. No one had thought a cat could take down such a strong, awakened one as Mr. Seong. And Hyuk calls them and says he doesn't find it surprising because cats are totally capable of doing that. He states that there are still unsolved mysteries about cats, and this is just another one of those mysteries, and it is now revealed to the world. Everyone is quiet at his explanation because they know that he is obsessed with cats, and Mr. Kang asks him if he is saying that it's not weird for that small cat to have such combat skills. In Hyuk gets up excitedly and asks him to think about how both tigers and lions are felines like cats. This means ferocity was in their genes to begin with, and on top of that, if what Miss Ko said is true, then the cat has the same potential as lion and tiger. Miss Ko thinks cats may have that kind of potential all along, and she can't deny it since she saw it with her own eyes. However, In Hyuk says that kind of result happened because Mr. Seong just stood there without fighting back, and a teacher asks him to name the skill the cat used on Mr. Seong. In Hyuk replies that the skill is just a kitty punch, also known as cat punch, and everyone seems surprised at this. In Hyuk says it's not a special skill, and even ordinary cats use it, but that cat was pretty strong. After that, they decided to evaluate Jiwoo's performance. They think his fighting abilities are weaker than those of Suchin, but he only lost because he dragged out the fight. He had Jiwoo overpowered and had the chance to end him. Miss Ko is also at the point where Jiwoo may be better than other students, but he's not exactly at the same level as Jisuk, Subin, Gangseok, and Suchin. However, putting Jiwoo below them doesn't seem right, and they seem answerless at this. Mr. Park says his talent is the best in the academy, and he is even more gifted than the 5 students mentioned earlier. In Hyuk agrees with Mr. Park and says improving just one power if difficult enough. But Jiwoo showed an outstanding performance using an electrical attribute and the ability to commune with animals, which has nothing to do with his original power, speed. The fact that he is able to enhance the abilities of an animal he communes with is nothing to sneeze at, and Mr. Kang also agrees with this. Miss Ko says he wasn't able to control the animal fully during combat, so it's hard to evaluate his power to commune with animals properly. However, considering his talent and the wide range of his powers, she thinks he should be classified as the highest level, like the other 5. Mr. Jang suggested they should report this to the principal, but not disclose it to the other students or people outside because it would only cause confusion. He is sure Baekdu wouldn't want the word to get out, and he has asked Jiwoo to keep quiet as well. After that, Mr. Han is shocked to know that Mr. Seong got injured while testing a student named Jiwoo Seo, and he was caught completely off guard and was attacked one-sidedly. He orders his secretary to bring him information about Jiwoo as soon as possible. The same evening, Jiwoo brings Kaden on a walk and asks if he is feeling better after taking a nap. Kaden says ever since he turned into a cat, he just can't function without taking a nap. He tells him that Isol is watching them again. Jiwoo calls her and asks if she is walking her dog, and she asks him if he is walking his cat. He really likes her dog and says he is so big. Isol asks him if he thought about joining Mir. Jiwoo apologizes to her and says he gave her his answer the first time she asked him. She thinks he has many groups he can join besides Mir, and he will probably get a lot of offers. He asks her permission if he can pat her dog, and she allows him to do so. He also asks the dog if he can pat him for a second, and is happy to see that he is much softer and fluffier than he looks. Jiwoo really likes him and says he looks so cool and must be very popular. He asks Isol about his name, and she gets confused by his question. She tells him that his name is Duri. Jiwoo really likes his name, and Duri also shakes hands with him while Isol gets embarrassed behind him. At the same time, Wooin, Subin, and Jisuk watch them while hiding, and they can see that Isol has feelings for Jiwoo. After that, they go to his room, and Subin acts like Jiwoo, and they consider Kaden as Duri, and Jisuk acts like Isol. They act in the same scene that happened at the park. She exclaims, saying that he looks so cool, and asks Jisuk about his name. He pretends to like Isul and says his name is Duri. She appreciates his name just like Jiwoo did, and he says he has a cool name and must be popular. Subin sees Jae-wisuk's expressions, and he laughs loudly, saying he is making her cringe. She comes to Jiwoo and asks when he and Isol have a thing going on. Jiwoo is serious and tells her that it's nothing like that. He tells them that he only talked to her for the second time today. They both observe that Isol has a secret crush on Jiwoo, and this just gets way more interesting. They are leaving to somewhere, and Jiwoo asks them why they are going so early, but they leave the room with the devil smiles on their faces. They also take Wooin with them and ask each other to find Isol. Wooin asks them why they need to find her, and Jisuk turns to him. He asks him to listen to him carefully and says when he can clearly see someone has a secret crush on someone, so it is their duty to follow them to the ends of the earth and make fun of them. They laugh and ask him to come with them, while Wooin is shocked at what he should do now. On the other hand, Mr. Kaden relaxes and says these kids are always so noisy. Jiwoo says they misunderstood the situation, and nothing is going on between him and Isol. He asks Kaden if he must have been really popular, and he barks and says people from all over the world came just to get a look at him, and when they did, they clung to him even more. He says being popular is good for nothing, and it's annoying and gets in the way of training. Jiwoo asks him if he is popular to the point where it becomes annoying, and he replies that everyone who saw him had never seen anyone as handsome as him, and even his enemies admitted he was good looking. On the other hand, Mr. Han is informed that Jiwoo remains unnoticed until Shinhwa discovers him, and his power isn't outstanding at all when he is first found. Shinhwa is still keeping that information a secret, but that is what they discovered from their investigation. Mr. Han wonders how he can become so strong in such a short amount of time and thinks about talking to him himself. He then calls Jiwoo to see him, and Kaden follows the theme and wonders why he called him at such a late hour, and this thing is bothering him. He apologizes for calling him out at this hour and says he has been hearing a lot about him from the instructors, who said he is a very talented, awakened one. He heard he uses his powers based on super speed and electricity, and that he is able to commune with animals. Jiwoo says he is not talented at all, that he won the match by luck, and that his friends are much stronger than him. Mr. Han smiles and asks him not to be so humble because all of the instructors in the academy think very highly of him. Besides, not everyone can enhance their powers in such a short period. He asks him about his future plans and says he declines Mir's offer, and there is nothing official between him and Shinhwa. Jiwoo replies he has nothing set for now, and Mr. Han wants to make an offer to him. He offers him to become his apprentice, and Jiwoo and Kaden both are shocked at his offer. He reveals that he was the strongest awakened one in the country before retiring, and he had to give up that title when he retired. But he is still as strong as he was back then. He is offering him the chance to apprentice under such a person, and if he does this, then no one will look down on him for being unaffiliated, and he won't have to join a group either. He tells him that becoming his apprentice is different from joining Biko because he already retired, which might complicate things since the current chairman of Biko is also his apprentice. Jiwoo is confused and asks why he is making such an offer, and he replies that he has a remarkable talent and can help him maximize it. He tells him that his fighting style is close combat, and his force control and fighting skills will create a positive synergy with his because he also engages in close combat by enhancing his body. With his super speed, he will be able to get much stronger under his guidance. Kaden thinks it's definitely a good offer for Jiwoo, and that way, he would be able to live with nothing to hide instead of worrying that his relationship with him might get revealed. Besides, Seonggil isn't saying it openly, but he is one of the world's strongest awakened ones, and becoming his apprentice is best for Jiwoo's future. Jiwoo tells him that he already has a mentor, and Mr. Han replies he is already aware of this, and it doesn't matter because that's the past now. Moreover, Mr. Han is sure that his mentor will also be happy about this offer. Jiwoo says he is very grateful for the offer, but he must decline, and his refusal shocked Han and Jiwoo. Mr. Han says he doesn't think he fully understands what Tai offer holds for him and shouldn't make such a decision. He gives him more time to think about it and asks him to discuss it with his mentor after the academy. Jiwoo says there is no need for this, and he is sure of his decision. He then comes back to Kaden and asks him if he is done talking to him. He asks him what he said. Jiwoo replies he complimented him more than he deserved, and Kaden knows that he is hiding the real part of the conversation. Jiwoo thanked him and said he was able to get acknowledged by others just because of his instructions. He is always grateful to him for that, and Kaden asks him not to be satisfied with where he is now, and Jiwoo promises to work harder. On the other hand, Mr. Han is still there, thinking he didn't expect him to refuse his offer, and remembering what Jiwoo said. He knows that it's the offer of a lifetime, but his mentor is the best to him, and he is incomparable to anyone else. He doesn't know who his mentor is, but he is very jealous of him right now. The next morning, he goes for a walk with Kaden and tells him that he can't suddenly expand the capacity of his awakened powers or gain experience. So, one of the few ways to get stronger is to learn how to efficiently use the awakened power he already has. He advises him to always focus on how his body reacts and how his muscles, bones, and energy move whenever he does something, even if it is something as trivial as walking and breathing. He also asks him to think about how he can effectively use his awakened power to do those tasks and sweat the details, which will help him get stronger. After a while, Isol also comes for a walk and thinks if Jiwoo might be around or if it is so early in the morning. She then gets happy to see him and thinks he must be taking a morning walk with his cat. But before she can go to him, Subin, Jisuk, and Wooin reach there and say they need to talk to her. She asks him why she keeps flirting with her boyfriend, while Isol is surprised and asks what she is talking about. She says Subin is not making any sense, but is surprised when she takes Jiwoo's name. She comes to him and says she knows she has been following him. Isol is shocked and asks her if Jiwoo is her boyfriend, and she brags and says he is her boyfriend. Isol seems stunned, and Subin asks her if she doesn't believe her. She asks Jisuk to tell her, and he replies she is telling the truth, and that Jiwoo is her boyfriend. He exclaims he is her boyfriend with a space in between. They are shocked to see that Isol has tears in her eyes and starts running away. Jisuk and Subin run behind her and call, saying they are done talking to her. Jisuk shouts at her that Subin even slept over at his house the day before the academy, and she is shocked and sad to hear this. They have evil smiles on their faces and enjoy her condition while Wooin is just watching them from a distance. Jiwoo is then working out when Mr. Han appears there and asks if he is taking a walk. He sees Kaden and asks if this is the can he communes with, and he hears that he can only commune with this cat yet shows impressive performance. Mr. Han is staring at him, and Jiwoo thinks some people noticed he used Mr. Kaden's force control from the latest match he had with Suchin, and maybe he noticed that this is Mr. Kaden. Since Mr. Han is a strong awakened one, so he might have noticed that his ability to commune with animals is a lie. and it was, in fact, Mr. Caden who took down Mr. Sion. Mr. Han sits down and says his cat is so cute, and it's too bad he already has an owner. He really wanted to take him with him and give him some snacks. After when he is left, Jiwoo says that he scared him to death, and he heard that he is a strong awakened one, so he thought he noticed who he is. Caden says he is strong and wasn't called the strongest awakened one in the country for nothing. However, he hides his strength from everyone for some reason, and Jiwoo asks him if he knows him. Caden replies he even met him before. He reveals that each country has its own rankings, but there is also a global one, and Mr. Han ranked around 50th on the global chart, which means he is extremely strong. However, the Seongguk he knows is even stronger than that, and he heard he retired from old age, but he doesn't think he got any weaker. He just can't figure out what he is up to. He asks Jiwoo why he refused to become an apprentice of such a person and says being his apprentice doesn't simply mean he gets to have a strong teacher. But he could have gained some authority, and his life would have been a bed of roses. Having him as a mentor is much safer and more comfortable than having Caden as one. Jiwoo says he can't overcome his limits when he is comfortable. He smiles and asks home where he can go, and he still has a long way left to make everything he taught him his own. After some time, Mr. Seong is talking to someone on the phone and apologizing to him, while the other person seems angry and says they are in a crisis where they have to establish a position for Baekdu through this academy, but he blows it. He asks him to shut up and says if he weren't part of the Baekdu family, then he would have made him pay for his mistakes. He also asks him to prepare to greet their elders since he will soon pay a visit. Mr. Seong tries to say something to his chairman, but he hangs up the phone, scared that the ex-chairman will be there. He is scared and thinks he will kill him. He has to do something before he gets here. He rushes somewhere when two instructors appear there and asks about his health. He ignores them and rushes to the other side. Miss Ko says he seems fine on the outside, but she thinks his pride is still recovering. The other teacher says he would have been devastated for days if he had been defeated by a cat since he was brutally beaten. Meanwhile, Jisuk appears there and listens to their conversation. He is shocked to know that the reason why Mr. Seong isn't seen around the campus is because he was beaten up by a cat. He thinks it must be Jiwoo's awakened cat who did this. He then goes to Caden and offers him a lot of snacks. He also apologizes for his carelessness and says these snacks were all he could get his hands on within the academy. He tells him that he will have a lot more to enjoy, and he has ordered something that he might like, and they should be there pretty soon. Caden wonders what happened to him suddenly, and Subin asks others why he always acts weird around that cat. On the other side, Jiyoung receives a message from Jisuk, and he asks her to send him all the products a cat might like. Jisuk still bows before Caden with respect, and he is quiet, too. Suddenly, Hiko 25-old feel the glance of all the teachers at his door watching him quietly. At the same time, the ex-chairman of Biko reaches the academy and says this is the place where his dear Suchin is. The teachers are surprised at his arrival and wonder why he has come there out of the blue. Miss Ko says this is probably because Baekdu heard the news about Suchin and Mr. Seong, and she is a little worried because he is known for his temper. She asks others if Mr. Han and Mr. Kang are on good terms now because, from what she knows, they often had conflict when they were both working in the field. Mr. Kang replies he can't be sure about that either, and this is the first time they have met each other since they retired. They are at Mr. Han's office, and he says from the way he announces himself by spreading his energy that he can see that he is still the old Dusik King he knows. He replies he is getting old, and it seems like he can't control his powers occasionally, and it just slips out. Mr. Han asks him why he arrived, and he replies that he is there to see him, his old friend. He was curious about what kind of devious plan he had in his mind when he took the position as the academy's principal after officially retiring. Mr. Han says he has no plan and just couldn't say no to their younger awakened ones. He also says Dusik is retired, but he is still titled as an elder in Baekdu, and he replies he is an elder in name only, just like every other elder. He says he heard a ridiculous report that the unaffiliated students would be educated as equally as their affiliated students. He asks him how they can achieve their goals by wasting their resources like that, and asks him what good they can get by giving a chance to unaffiliated students. Mr. Han replies he has seen potential in a few of them, and one of them actually defeated Suchin. The elder asks him if he hasn't learned from experience that unaffiliated can betray the groups and the country at any time, and he asks him to remember how much damage their nation has suffered because of that incident. He also asks him if other groups will be okay with this, and his decision will cause conflict between the groups, lessen the powers of awakened ones, and weaken their clout. Mr. Han replies the groups he is worried about are the ones who made him the principal of the academy, and as the principal, he has the authority to set the rules there. After that, Mr. Han gets outside and remembers what Dusik Kang told him. Unaffiliated awakened ones can betray them at any time. Meanwhile, Jiwoo comes to him and pays his respects, and he asks him if he is also out for a walk. He then asks him if they can walk together and says his cat isn't with him today. Jiwoo replies that he doesn't always keep his company, and he asks him if he has thought his offer over by any chance. Jiwoo replies that he had already given him his answer back then, and Mr. Han says he doesn't think he fully understands the relationship between a mentor and a mentee. For awakened ones, a mentor is someone more than a teacher they meet at the academy. Teachers there have a limit to what they can teach since they are not allowed to share any of their group's knowledge or data. They can only teach what they have personally learned through experience. However, a mentor and mentee relationship between awakened ones is more intimate than that of a parent and child since they get to learn all of their accomplishments. Mr. Han says he can even learn force control, which is never easy to learn from someone, as it is considered to be one's everything. So mentors teach their force control only to their most trusted apprentice. He reveals that awakened ones are more exclusive than they think, and they don't want others to know what theirs is, so the primary apprentice is usually family, which is also why one can't have multiple mentors. Jiwoo remembers what Caden has done for him until now and thinks he is the first disciple he has ever had. He thanked Mr. Han for this useful information, but he was surprised. Jiwoo says that from what he has told him, he just realizes how much his mentor has done for him. Mr. Han was first shocked that he turned his conversation differently, then laughed loudly. On the other hand, Elder Jusik shouts at Suchuan and says he told him to defeat other students, not to get defeated by some unaffiliated one. He seems so scared and says this was because he let his guard down, not because he is weaker than him. But he is furious at him and says whatever the reason was, he lost and has dishonored Baekdu. He grabs him by his shoulder and says he would have abandoned him immediately if there was another heir to succeed Baekdu. But he is lucky that he doesn't have any siblings. He tells him that Baekdu can never lose to anyone, and he has to win no matter what. Suchin says he will always keep that in mind, and he asks him to leave the room. While leaving, he thinks his grandfather doesn't even know his grandson's name and his name is Suchin, but he calls him Suchin. After that, Mr. Desuk calls Mr. Seong, who is already trembling with fear. The old man says he should have done his job perfectly and taken good care of his students and asks him how he dared to let Suchon lose. He bows before him, apologizes to him, and says he will set things straight. He begs him and says he will show the other groups the price one has to pay for messing with Baekdu. And the old man says this is how Baekdu rules. When he leaves, he thinks he will destroy Jiwoo so he can never use his awakened power again since he is the one who caused all this mess, and then he will take responsibility for his actions. He thinks he may get lucky and be off the hook in no time, and the best they could do would be to make a complaint or something. Suddenly, he finds Caden walking around, thinking he will kill the cat first and then deal with Jiwoo. Caden thinks about the power he felt from the ex-chairman of Baekdu, and thinks the average strength of the awakened ones there is far greater than those of the other countries. Suddenly, Mr. Seong reaches there and says this is a perfect place to kill him. He has used his gravitational power to pull him down and says his power is something an animal like him can't even hope to imitate. He angrily asks how dares a cat humiliate him like that, and he will beat the crap out of him as he did to him until he dies. Suddenly, Caden disappears in front of him and appears behind him. He grabs his head and says this is the power a cat has and gives him an electric shock using his awakened power. The electric shock is so high that Jiwoo can feel it in his room, and after that, it starts raining. Caden leaves him there and walks away, and Mr. Seong lies there in 22-da state of shock. The next day, In Hyuk informs everyone that yesterday evening, Mr. Seong was struck by lightning and is now unconscious. Everyone is shocked to hear this, and Miss Ko guesses even an awakened one is bound to get hurt from an unexpected lightning strike. They wonder why he was wandering the woods in this rain. However, they still feel very sorry for him, and everyone is silent for a moment to pray for him. On the other side, Mr. Dusek is also informed about this and is shocked that he stormed out of the room to make things straight, but instead got knocked out by lightning. His man tells him that they have to wait and see when he wakes up, and Mr. Dusek says he ruined Bikdu's image right till the end, and he asks his men about the investigation on the Clean brothers. He reveals that the Union is investigating in complete secrecy, and they are not sure how much progress they have made, but they will never know that they cooperated with the Klein brothers. Mr. Dusek then asks about traces of the professor, and that the Kian brothers were there to get him. His man also has done some research on that unaffiliated student and reveals that his name is Jiwoo Seo, and Shinhwa brought him. He finds out that his current ability is a little weak, but the potential he has is phenomenal, and it's graded even higher than Suchin and the other members of the three. He asks his man if he is sure that Jiwoo is unaffiliated and says he should pay him a visit. On the other side, when Kaden goes to his room, Jiwoo informs him that Mr. Seong got struck by lightning, and he is the one he cat punched the other day. Jiwoo says he thinks even awakened ones can get hurt pretty badly by lightning, and Kaden says it depends on who the awakened one is, but one may even die from it. Jiwoo hopes that he gets better soon, and Kaden just smirks at this. Jiwoo gets up and asks if he wants to join him for a walk, but he refuses, saying he needs to do 2,000 more steps of his workout. He then goes for a walk and thinks, as Mr. Kaden taught him, that he has to keep every part of his body in mind, even when he is walking. Meanwhile, Isol is following him and wants to tell him hello, but she can't. She has tears in her eyes and can't believe he is the boyfriend of Subin. Suddenly, Subin calls her from behind and says she already warned her, but she is again there stalking her boyfriend and says it's a crime. She shouts at them and says it's nothing like that, and she doesn't like Jiwoo. Subin asks her if she means that, and she replies that she has never been interested in Jiwoo. Subin then calls Jiwoo and asks if he heard her. Isul is shocked to know that Jiwoo is already there and stands behind her. He is just smiling, and Isol wonders if he heard everything. Subin says he got rejected for no reason. Jiwoo smiles and says he was never popular with girls, while Isol starts running and leaves them there. Jisuk calls Subin and asks why she is just standing there and asks her to go and comfort Isol since she is crying. She also says they should console her and start running after her. Jiwoo just stands there and seems confused because he doesn't understand what they are doing. Meanwhile, Mr. Dusek comes there and asks if he is Jiwoo Seo. He tells him that he is the ex-chairman of Bikdu and Suchin's grandfather. Jiwoo pays him his respect and asks him if he can talk to him for a second. He says he heard that he beat his little Suchin, and he replies that it was out of luck. If Suchin hadn't let his guard down, he would never have stood a chance. Mr. Dusek thinks he knows his place and says it's very impressive, considering that Susihan was trained in Bikdu ever since he was little. The reason he came to see him was to make him an offer and ask him to come and join Bikdu. Jiwoo is shocked at his offer, and Mr. Dusek thinks he never would have expected to be scouted, and no wonder, he is so speechless out of pure joy. He calls him and says it seems like he has surprised him with such a sudden offer, but Jiwoo bows before him and apologizes to him. The old man is shocked and asks what he meant by he is sorry, and Jiwoo replies he is grateful for his wonderful offer, but he can't join Bikdu. He revealed that he already has a mentor, and he has turned down the principal's offer as well. Mr. Dusek is shocked that Mr. Han also made him an offer. He wonders if he wants this kid that badly and exclaims Mr. Han is the best awakened one in the country, but he is just as good as him. When they both worked in the field, Mr. Han, and he always competed for the title of the strongest awakened one. Jiwoo says he heard that Mr. Principal is really strong and pleased that top-tier awakened ones like himself and Seongguk can't fight as they wish. He states they both suffer damage regardless of who wins and loses, so the higher the ranking, the more inaccurate it is. Additionally, Mr. Han is already retired and is no longer part of Biko, but he is Bikdu's elder, which means he can support him with Bikdu's resources as much as he wants. Jiwoo again apologizes to him and says his mind is already set, and the elder Dusek gets angry at this and thinks how dares a mere unaffiliated student refuse his offer. He is about to attack him, saying he will kill him, but Subin and Jisuk reach there and call Jiwoo to their side. Mr. Dusek thinks he forgot that they were in public, and they start checking their phones, saying the groups have to wait until the end of the academy to scout any unaffiliated students. She exclaims she should call Mr. Park and tell him to make offers as soon as possible, while Jisuk says he is telling In Hyuk and Juyung. They ask each other how they have phones, and they both reveal they have stolen them, while Mr. Dusik is just shockingly watching them. The next day, he goes to all the teachers and asks how it is possible for affiliated and unaffiliated students to be educated equally. Mr. Kang replies that the principal has already approved the matter, and he says they should have tried to do something about it. He asks them if they really think this is some kind of school just because they call this place an academy. He states that this place is a cornerstone for developing their young awakened ones to become leaders of this country and, by extension, this world. He is not happy that now completely unverified unaffiliated students are going to take the same path as their affiliated students. Mr. Jang calls him and says there is plenty of potential among the unaffiliated students as well, but he insults him back and says he doesn't have a prestigious background just like them. He asks him if this is the reason he is so overly protective of them. In Hyuk interrupts and says he is crossing the line, but he smiles and says since Shinhwa and the Union also indiscriminately accept the awakened ones and enhance their powers, his comments may sound offensive. They both stare at him, but his man steps up and says he doesn't like the way they are looking at their elder. Mr. Kang gets up and says this is enough, and says the elder has a point, but this is an academy for awakened ones, and it was established on the promise that education would be decided within the academy. He again interrupts him and says that the promise doesn't include sharing the benefits with its unaffiliated students, and asks them if they think their groups will agree to it. He asks them to look at what this policy has done already, and if they can't see how it's causing trouble even for them. After some time, he comes out of the office and calls all the teachers idiots because they are all okay with the new rule. One of his men asks if he thinks they understood him, and he replies that at least all the groups will be happy that he stepped in. This is the reason they, Baekdu, have to lead everyone. In the meantime, Mr. Han's secretary comes to him and informs him that the principal wants to see him. When he goes to see him, Mr. Han says he should go now. He came to pay a visit, and now he has done so he should leave. Mr. Dusik thinks he wants to get rid of him since he is getting in his way. He says that he wants to stay a little longer as a guardian of Baekdu students, but Mr. Han says this is one of the reasons he should leave. He exclaims that a guardian is not to stay on campus for days, and only visits are allowed. He heard he even tried to scout an unaffiliated student, which is a violation of the rules. He replies he couldn't help it because he was way too talented, and asks Mr. Han if he also gave him an offer himself. Mr. Han replies this has nothing to do with him, so it's not against the rules. He thinks Han tried to make that kid his personal apprentice, and Mr. Han asks him if he even requested the personal information of students. He exclaims he has no right to do that, even if he is an elder of Baekdu. On the other side, Jiwoo is practicing force control and then rushes toward his class saying this is his first class after recovering. He tells Kaden he will see him after class, while Kaden thinks using power in this body is still inefficient. Just that single attack cost him a whole lot of energy. He thinks if he didn't try to attack him, then he wouldn't have had to waste all that energy. This lack of efficiency isn't just because he is not used to this body, but also because he hasn't fully recovered from his earlier injuries. It takes hours to recover or collect energy. On the other side, other students are happy to see Jiwoo and ask him if he's taking classes from now and also ask about his health. Jihai informs him that starting next week, they will be taking the same classes as the affiliated students. Jiangsu says they are far behind them, so their teaching styles will be different. However, all the teachers will take turns teaching them, and the benefits they will get will be completely different. They are so excited to take other teachers' classes. Meanwhile, Mr. Dusik reaches there and listens to their conversation, and thinks they forgot themselves and are full of false hopes. He calls everyone and asks them to get out of there, and his men ask everyone to expect Jiwoo to leave. The students ask who they are, but they warn them to leave, except for Jiwoo Seo. Jiangsu comes forward and says he doesn't know who they are, but they have a class starting soon. However, he is shocked when Jiwoo tells him that he is Suchin's grandfather, and he tells them that those men are his entourage. They now know that he is the ex-chairman of Baekdu, and he used to be an iconic awakened one in the country. He asks everyone to step outside for a moment since he has to talk to Jiwoo in private. Jiwoo says bye and says he will see them later, and they leave the gym after a while. After that, when they are only there, Mr. Dusik thinks Mr. Han tried to make him his personal apprentice, and if he made a move, then it definitely means there is something in this kid. He thinks he will never let Han take it, but instead, he will make this kid join the... He thinks he will offer him something anyone would desire, something no one can refuse. He tells Jiwoo that he has come here to make an offer to him, but Jiwoo refuses his offer even before listening to him. He asks Jiwoo to hear him out, and if he joins Baekdu, he will offer him something very best. But Jiwoo again refuses him and says he isn't interested in joining any group at the moment. The old man gets angry and asks him how he dares to disrespect him, but Jiwoo tries to tell him that he has no intentions of this. But he seems outrageous and asks if he is looking down on Baekdu, and uses his awakened power to grab Jiwoo by his neck. He exclaims he must have overestimated him and lifts him up in the air. He seems furious and says he forgot that a punk like him never learns the easy way and intends to kill him on the spot. He blames Jiwoo that he thinks the Great Baekdu, one of the groups representing this country, is a pushover that he can belittle. Jiwoo tries to tell him that he didn't disrespect him or Baekdu, and he thinks he might misunderstand him and thinks he is weighing his options if he refuses him after he finishes. The old man says he will give him another chance and asks him to join Baekdu, and he promises him only the best of everything, and he will never get a better offer than this. Jiwoo again replies that he doesn't want to be affiliated with a group, and the old man asks even if that means he will be hurt so badly that he might never be able to use his powers again. Jiwoo asks him why he is doing this to him, and he replies he has to pay the price for putting Baekdu to shame by refusing it. Jiwoo calls Mr. Kaden for help, but he is in his room, unaware of what is happening to him. He remembers when he asked him if he is affiliated with a group, and Kaden says he must be really curious to ask him so directly since he rarely asks him any questions about him. He asks him why he is asking him this, and Jiwoo replies he wants to join his group. Kaden tells him the bad news that he is not affiliated with anyone. However, it's really dangerous in this line of work without a group to support and protect him. But he went through well. He didn't know who to trust no matter how close he was with them, and powerful groups thought it was okay to ignore the will and opinions of an individual awakened one who worked alone. Jiwoo asks him why he didn't join a group, and he replies that he doesn't like the idea of belonging somewhere. Besides, none of the groups seem to work for him. Jiwoo exclaims he wants to be like him, an awakened one who never yields to others' views. Kaden says he can go ahead if he wants to, but it will be really tough. He is still at the point where he doesn't want to be a part of a group. Mr. Dusik states that no one else can if they can't have him. He uses his awakened power to turn Jiwoo backward and cries in pain. Mr. Dusik asks him to scream all he wants because no one will come to help him, and he has used his power to soundproof this room. He says the power he is under right now probably feels familiar from the fight with Suchin, and he has put a gravitational point within his body so that he will crumple up like a piece of paper. At the same time, the teachers appear outside, and Mr. Jang asks the students why they are all there. Jihai points toward the men and tells them that they told them to leave their room, and Suchin's grandfather said he wanted to talk to Jiwoo in private and kicked them out. Mr. Jang says he is going in, but the man stops him and says no one can enter the room because this is an order from their elder. He asks him to enter after their elder is done with his business, but Jang resists and says there is no need to close them out of the room like this. In-hik and Mr. Park ordered all the students to return to their rooms, and today's class was dismissed. After that, he tells the man that he is going inside, but he doesn't allow him. In-hyuk and Mr. Park step forward and block their path. Mr. Jang takes advantage and enters the room, and they are shocked to see the situation inside. He scolds his men and says he told them not to let anyone in. They step up and ask what he is doing and say he can't do this to Jiwoo, while he replies he has every reason to do this. He exclaims that Jiwoo is a spy who came to snoop around this academy, and In-hyuk asks him what he meant by this. He replies that Baekdu checks his background and they find out that he is a spy, and he can just forge some evidence later. In-hyuk asks him to stop and says Shinhwa brought Jiwoo after a thorough investigation, and Mr. Dusik replies that their investigation wasn't enough. In-hyuk asks him to show them evidence, and he replies that he will give them evidence later. He asks In Hyuk what he is going to do about this, and if he resists him, then they will consider that Shinhwa is turning their back on Baekdu. He asks him if Shinhwa wants to confront Baekdu, and he gets quiet because things are getting out of their hands. Jang and Mr. Park are also quiet, and Mr. Dusik asks them if they are going to get on each other's bad side just because of this kid, especially when foreign awakened ones are desperately looking for a chance to bring their country down. He resumes his torture of Jiwoo and asks him about who his mentor is, while the teachers are just quiet. In Hyuk releases his awakened power and is about to stop him when he is shocked to see that Mr. Park and Jang are also ready to fight. He asks them if they are serious, and they reply that the situation is already messed up and they have to protect their student. Mr. Dusik is surprised and asks if they are going to take action just because of a kid and orders his men to take care of them. However, before they start fighting, Mr. Han appears there and asks everyone to stop. He asks the instructor to step back, but In Hyuk tries to say something, but he lifts his hand and asks him to stop. He asks Dusik what he is doing, and he asks him to mind his own business, and he interrogates a spy for the sake of this academy and the awakened ones in the country. Mr. Han asks him for evidence, and he replies that it's on its way. Mr. Han says they will follow the proper procedure and that they will get the evidence later. Mr. Dusik asks why they will get through this trouble, saying they can just get rid of him now. He asks Mr. Han if he is trying to confront him, and if he wants to make Baekdu his enemy. Mr. Han understands the situation and apologizes to Jiwoo that he can't step in. He also asks other teachers that they must give in when they have to, and if they are really going to fight Baekdu, one of the groups that support their country, just for the sake of one student. He says he can't let them do that, and the same goes for him. He can't decide on a whim to confront Dusik and Baekdu. However, it's a different story if Jiwoo becomes his apprentice, and the teachers are shocked to learn that he wants to make him his apprentice. He asks Jiwoo to become his apprentice, and then he can step in as his mentor. He also exclaims he doesn't mind him keeping his relationship with his original mentor, and Mr. Dusik shockingly thinks he is desperate to have this kid. He decides to kill Jiwoo before he gives an answer and increases the level of his power that Jiwoo screams in pain. Mr. Han also acts and tries to stop him from using his power. Suddenly, the roof breaks with an electric shock, and someone appears there with so much electric energy. The energy level is so high that they can't even see the person. Mr. Han recognizes the person and is astonished to see Kaden there. Mr. Dusik is shocked and thinks how he interfered with his skill, and to be exact, he completely cut off the power he was using on Jiwoo. He asks Kaden about who he is, and he calls Jiwoo and asks him to watch and learn how to get rid of an enemy who gets in his way. He uses his electricity power to attack Mr. Dusik, but he reacts in time and tries to dodge him. He tries to cancel out his power, but he is nothing against Kaden's power, and he overcomes him, but he cannot block his power. There is an electric shock with so much intensity that it blows the academy's building. The academy's building is totally blown up, and the teachers are shocked at what just happened there. Mr. Kang thinks an immense amount of energy came from there, but not from the principal or Mr. Dusik. They wonder who it was and who made Mr. Dusik in such a condition. He seems very injured because of the electric shock, and his men rush toward him to help. The teachers are shocked to see that Mr. Duzin got injured, and if it was to do with the intense energy they sensed earlier. They wonder who in the world hurt one of this country's best awakened ones that badly. Mr. Dusik is also shocked at his condition and wonders if he failed to defend himself perfectly, but still, how he can hurt this badly by a single attack. Moreover, he hadn't seen such strong electrical power in his life. Meanwhile, Mr. Han recognizes him and calls his name, Kaden, asking what brought him there. Everyone is shocked that he is Kaden, and In Hyuk remembers the traces they found earlier were really Kaden's. Mr. Dusik says he is Kaden since no one else can possibly have such strong power. He asks him why he attacked him because he has done nothing to provoke him, and Kaden replies he started the fight by harassing his apprentice. Mr. Dusik asks what he is talking about and when he has harassed his apprentice. Suddenly, he and the other teachers realize that Jiwoo is his apprentice. Mr. Han is also shocked and asks if Jiwoo is his apprentice. He replies that Jiwoo is his apprentice, and he became one just recently, and that guy just tortured him. He asks Mr. Han to stay out of this while still in surprise. Mr. Dusek gets up and says there seems to be a misunderstanding, and he doesn't know he is his apprentice. He was tipped off that he was a spy, so he had no choice. Mr. Caden asks if he is serious that he would buy that. He asks Mr. Dusek if Beekdu has anything to do with his harassment of his apprentice. He asks him to think well before answering this. Meanwhile, all the teacher are just watching them with their eyes open. Caden exclaims he won't back down no matter who his opponent is, and even if it's Beekdu, he will destroy them all. He tells him he is used to fighting guys like them and doesn't even need to deal with them as a group, if he just takes his time and breaks him all apart. Eventually, only a few leaders will be left. He humiliated him, saying getting rid of Beekdu is a piece of cake for him, while he is just looking down in embarrassment. Mr. Kang thinks he isn't bluffing because he used that exact method to bring down several groups. Since he was so unpredictable, groups without a match for him ended up collapsing. Mr. Dusek now regrets and thinks he didn't know Caden was his mentor. He says Beekdu has nothing to do with this. He admits his fault, says he misunderstood Jiwoo and apologizes for attacking his apprentice. The teachers are now more astonished that notorious Mr. Dusek is apologizing and think Caden sure is something. Caden asks him if he is joking, and his sorry doesn't cut it for hurting his apprentice this badly. He is sure he is not the type to make apologies anyway, so he asks him to deal with this the way he usually would. Mr. Dusek is so embarrassed at such humiliation, and the teachers think Caden is really like they heard about him. Jiwoo calls him from behind, but Caden says he will not stop. He asks him to look at himself and how badly he is injured. Mr. Han calls him and says he gets that he is mad, but he has done enough. He asks him to think about Jiwoo and that he can't always protect him, so he asks him to let this slide for his sake. Besides, if Beekdu becomes Jiwoo's enemy, he will have a hard time living as an awakened one there since Beekdu is a powerful group in this country. Caden understands the situation and says that since Jiwoo wants him to stop, he will, but he will keep an eye on Mr. Dusek and Beekdu. Mr. Han asks his men to take Mr. Dusek to the medical center, and he leaves, thinking he will get him back for this humiliation. Caden then says if the news about him being there or Jiwoo being his apprentice gets out, then he will hunt them to the ends of the earth. He says he will remember every one of their faces, and if a single word gets out, they are all dead. He then goes to Jiwoo and says he gets beaten almost every single day, but he apologizes to him for bothering him. Caden admits that he had a tough opponent this time. After that, the teachers were still shocked that he had blown up this building. It was specially built to endure the powers of awakened ones. Mr. Kang says Caden is a powerful awakened one, just like people say. They thought the rumors were exaggerated, but they surely weren't, and the power he used was more impressive than they imagined. Mr. Jang says his single attack incapacitated Mr. Kang, while Miss Ko says he was even more handsome than how people described him. She thought the people were bluffing, but he looked hot in person. Mr. Kang stops her and says this is not the point right now, and the big news is that Jiwoo is Caden's apprentice. And Hayek says from what he has heard, it has been less than a year since Jiwoo became Caden's apprentice, and maybe Caden thought highly of Jiwoo's potential. Miss Ko is also impressed by Jiwoo as well and says there have been countless people who wanted to be Caden's apprentice, but none of them actually made it. One of the teachers asks if Caden will kill them if they report this to their group. On the other side, Mr. Han tells Caden that it's surprising that he has been staying in their country all this time they were off the radar. The more surprising thing is that he has an apprentice now, and he replies that it just happened. Mr. Han says he is the famous mentor Jiwoo always talks about, and he always wondered about Jiwoo's mentor but had no idea it was him. Caden gets up, saying he will see Jiwoo, but he actually just came to pay him a visit. Mr. Han says he knows he is frustrated about Jiwoo's injuries and asks him if he can have a proper conversation with him sometime. Caden leaves his room, saying he will try to make time for that. He then goes to see Jiwoo and asks why he has made a long face. Caden says he worries about him because he has announced him as his apprentice. Maybe not now, but eventually, everyone is going to find out. Jiwoo asks him why he came to help him and starts crying, saying he just put himself in danger by making an appearance like that when he has not fully recovered yet. Jiwoo knows that he has transformed into a cat to recover and regain his energy. Because of him, he puts himself on the line, and Caden says he should worry about himself, as he has seen earlier how great he was. Jiwoo is still crying, and he pats his head and asks him to stop crying. The next day, Jihai asks others if they have seen the gym, and it was completely destroyed. They wonder if something happened between Mr. Dusik and Jiwoo. Mr. Jang said nothing happened, but they heard Jiwoo was caught up in the collapse and got injured. They decide to check up on him later. Every student talks about yesterday's collapse, and the entire island is shaken because of it. All the teacher told them it was nothing, but an explosion like that had to be something. They wonder if the teachers fought each other, but they all look fine. Mr. Seong was the only one injured, but that was by lightning. They call Suchin and ask if it isn't strange for Mr. Dusik to leave so hastily, and maybe it has something to do with yesterday's explosion. He seems quiet and worried and doesn't answer anyone. Gangseok also observes him, but none of them can come to a conclusion. On the other side, Mr. Kaden is at the principal's office, and he tells him that Dusik said he will leave as soon as he gets patched up, and he thinks he is planning on getting full medical support after he returns. Mr. Han thanked him for his generosity yesterday because if he killed Dusik and went to war with Baekdu, this country would have fallen into despair. Kaden says he doesn't need to thank him because he doesn't hold back for him. Mr. Han asks him if he is going to stay in this country from now on, and he replies he just came to see Jiwoo. Mr. Han smiles and says it would have been nice to have someone as strong as him there, and Kaden asks him if he really means that. He probably would have begged him to leave after a while, and Mr. Han changes the topic and asks if Jiwoo is going to be leaving with him. Kaden replies that Jiwoo will stay where he has to since accompanying him will be very dangerous for him. Mr. Han says it will benefit their country if someone as talented as Jiwoo stays. Kaden says he is retired, yet all he can think about is the well-being of his country. He asks him why he retired in the first place. Mr. Han replies that he retired because of him, and he once thought all the stories about him were exaggerated, but he was shocked after witnessing what he could do back then. He put down everything he had to get stronger when he saw how strong he would become without affiliating or well-planned training and support. Kaden just stares at his explanation and doesn't say anything. Mr. Han assures him that he will personally take care of Jiwoo when he is not around since he owes him that much. On the other side, Subin and Jisuk come to see Jiwoo, and the teachers tell them that he apparently got injured because the building collapsed on him. Jiwoo thinks that must be the excuse they went with, and Jisuk doesn't believe this and says the gym collapsed because of someone's awakened power in the first place. Moreover, they know that Jiwoo would have escaped from a collapsing building in no time due to his super speed. He asks others if they saw the power yesterday, and Subin also says the whole island shook, and just thinking about it gives her the chills. However, they are aware that the teachers are covering something up, so he doesn't have to explain anything to them. Subin says they have no clue what happened, but they don't want to get him in trouble just to find that out, and Jiwoo just thanks him. Jisuk says there is nothing to thank them for. They also inform them that they are wrapping up this academy semester. They had about 2 weeks left, but since the gym collapsed, they will just end this semester early. They then leave him and ask him to get some rest, and they will see him tomorrow. When they left, Wooin asked him if everything worked out between him and Suchin's grandfather, and he replied yes. He thinks everyone notices something has happened when they all leave his room. Mr. Kaden says he will deal with everything but wonders how things will work out. On the other hand, Mr. Dusik thinks about Kaden while on his ship, thinking he never expected him to be that strong. He thought he was overrated. Besides, he wouldn't have gotten so injured if he just defended himself in time. He thinks he will get him and his apprentice for this and orders his men to hand over Kaden's info to everyone. He is sure many Arcanes will be happy to hear Kaden's whereabouts, especially those holding a grudge against him. He smirks and orders his men to tell them about his apprentice as well. Then they will mess with Jiwoo first, or take him hostage to mess with Kaden. He exclaims that Baekdu was humiliated by a single person, and they can't just let him off the hook, and they have to make him pay. Suddenly, they are shocked to see Kaden there, and he says he has learned from experience that people like him never change. Mr. Dusik asks him to wait, saying there is no need to be flustered, but Kaden says not everyone can speak the same language. Clearly, he is not the person who will listen to them, and Mr. Dusik orders his men to kill him at the moment. They blow an attack on him, but the attack turns into a sphere of energy, and Mr. Dusik wonders if they can get him. However, they are shocked to see that Kaden stays unharmed, and he uses his electrical energy to attack them. His explosion of attack turns into a blast, and they all drown in the sea with the ship. Kaden stands on a rock and is watching them drown in the sea. The next day, In Hayek informs other teachers that Mr. Desuk is currently missing, and they are surprised that he left for Baekdu after getting patched up. In Hayek says he just heard from Baekdu that he has yet to return or contact them. They think he may have had personal business to attend to, and he is known for traveling on a whim, even amongst other Baekdu members. Im Hyuk says they may be right, plus he went through a lot at the academy. He asks them to pray for his safe return and be silent momentarily. After that, they are off to see their students and will see them later before leaving the academy. After that, a teacher suddenly remembers they had another job there and was supposed to keep Shinhwa and the union in check. But instead, they let In Hayek take control and lead everything, and they couldn't do anything of this type. They think they are all screwed and how they are supposed to report this to their headquarters. After that, Mr. Jang and In Hayek go to see all the unaffiliated students and say they probably have heard the news already that the academy semester is over. The students seem disappointed, but Mr. Jang asks them to stay positive. The academy will be reorganized, and their education will be significantly improved when they come back for the next semester. He advises them to train and enhance their powers wherever they are, and he hopes for the best of them all and will see them all next semester. He thinks it has been a short semester, but they have done well. Thanks to an unexpected turn of events, the unaffiliated students will now be treated as equally as the affiliated ones. All the students called him and thanked him for teaching them, and they were lucky to have him as their instructor. Jihai asks him if he will be teaching them next semester. They get happy when Mr. Jang says he will certainly teach them, and In Hayek and Mr. Park are just watching them from a distance. After that, Jihai tells them that she will make a group chat, and Jiwoo is sad that they finally became friends, but it's already time for them to go back. Meanwhile, Gangseok appears there and calls Jiwoo from behind. He introduces himself as Gangseok Choi of Biko, and he asks him if he will be back for the next semester. He was disappointed that he never got to spar with him. Jiwoo seems surprised, and Ganjok says he has nothing against him and simply wants to fight him after he watches him fight Suchin since he also engages in close combat like him. He then asks him to leave so that they can spar the next time they meet, and Jiwoo just smiles at him. Mr. Kang is watching them from a distance and hopes they won't fight each other because things will get very complicated no matter who wins. Jiwoo hopes that the next semester starts soon when he sees Kaden with Mr. Han and rushes to him. He asks him what he is doing there, and he replies that he wanted to say goodbye before he left. Jiwoo is surprised that he is leaving, and Kaden tells him it's time for him to return. His eyes fill with tears at thinking Kaden is leaving him, and Kaden asks him not to be so sad since he will come to visit him later. Jiwoo says he wants to go with him, but Kaden replies he can't go with him. He asks him to keep everything he has taught him in mind and practice, and he will come check in on him. Jiwoo is sad that he is really leaving and wonders when he will see him again, and Kaden then leaves him there, saying goodbye. When Jiwoo lifts his head, Kaden has disappeared from there and is only left with Mr. Han. Jiwoo thinks it's all his fault that he had to leave before fully recovering, and he makes an appearance to help him. He starts crying, and Mr. Han says he left him behind to protect him. He states Kaden isn't a villain, but because of his cruelty, he has a lot of enemies. Among them are people with power and influence that even Kaden has difficulty dealing with. If Jiwoo joins him at such a time, it might put his life and Kaden's life on the line because he is his apprentice. He reveals that Kaden has been challenging and defeating opponents solely to seek power without considering his wealth and reputation, and this is how he has become one of the best awakened ones in the world. Countless people wanted to take his power away or learn from him as he became stronger. He is sure many of Kaden's followers are willing to become his slaves to be his apprentice, but Kaden never accepts anyone. He tells Jiwoo that he is his one and only apprentice, and this is why he makes an appearance to help him. Jiwoo thinks he will be risking his own life whenever Mr. Kaden tries to help him. He promised himself that he wouldn't let him down, and he would become stronger by the time Mr. Kaden came back, so he no longer had to worry about him. He will proudly ask him to take him along with him. But soon he is shocked to see Kaden sleeping in his room in the cat's form. He starts crying and says he thought he really left. He replies he used up too much energy and can't go now. Jiwoo says he told him earlier that he had to go, and he replies this was only to fool Mistyhan because he has no idea how persistent he is. He snores again and says he is going back to sleep. He is exhausted from using his power without taking a nap. After that, they return to their homes, and Jiwoo greets all of his cats, who seem to miss them. They all jump upon them happily, while the gray cat also taps Kaden and looks at him while smiling. The next morning, Jiwoo is going to his school when he hears Kaden talking in sleep that he is the great casein nitrate. Jiwoo laughs and comes out of the house. He gets multiple texts from his friends that they don't want to go to school and have more fun at the academy than now. Jiwoo texts them that he came out to feed the stray cats before going to school, and they are surprised that he even feeds them. Jiwoo finds Wooin in the way, and he is also feeding the stray cats. He calls and asks if he came out early to feed the cats. They all look great, and Jiwoo thanks Shinhwa because they take good care of all the stray cats, and everyone is healthy. He is glad that they have been doing well because he was worried they might starve without them. Meanwhile, Jisuk appears there and asks if they are obsessed with feeding the cats. He says they just returned from the academy and are already back to feeding the cats. They are surprised when he also takes out cat food from his bag and starts feeding the cats, and is also scolding them, saying they don't know when to stop. Suddenly, he observes a fat cat among them, thinks he looks just about right, and asks him to eat more and get bigger, and he can be his 9th awakened candidate. Jiwoo calls him and says he carried around a lot of more snacks, while he exclaims they are just some leftovers. He remembers the stock he has brought for cat snacks and yet thinks he doesn't have enough to make the cats fatter. He then walks away and asks them to move on to the next area, where the stray cats might be. On the other side, a student is bullying and beating some other students and says they suck at collecting money, and they also failed to find Jisuk by the end of their break. There have been rumors that Jisuk doesn't hang out with these losers anymore, and he guesses that wasn't a rumor after all. They think if it wasn't for Seokjeol, then they could have beaten him until yet. He calls Seokjeol and asks what they should do with these kids. Seokjeol is a guy who appeared out of nowhere, took down all the thugs in the neighborhood, and became the leader. They heard 10 guys attack him at once, but couldn't even lay a finger on him. Seokjeol orders his man to let them go, and he asks them to go check if Jisuk came to school today and let them know. After that, they laugh and say maybe Jisuk went into hiding after hearing about Seokjeol's strength, and words got around that Seokjeol has been hunting for him. He squeezes the ball in his hands while thinking about Jisukyu. On the other side, all the students in the school asked each other about their vacation. Some girls are talking to each other, and one of them says she had a few blind dates over the break, but they were all a disaster. Another one says she thought she had a boyfriend and asked her when she broke up with him. They exclaim there are no decent boys in their class, and the other one says there are none in their entire school. One of them asks about Wooin and says he seems handsome, and she replies he is good looking but too quiet and gloomy. She then asks about Jiwoo, and she replies he is dull, dark, and has no self-esteem. Suddenly, Jiwoo and Wooin enter the class, and they are shocked to see them. He is talking about cats and says they should carry around more snacks from now on. The girls are surprised to see Jiwoo and wonder if he was always that handsome, and he seems like a totally different person. She wonders if he is really the Jiwoo who used to be all lonely and quieter and thinks of treating him better starting today. However, they are more surprised to see Subin there and wonder who she is, and she looks so tough, and her uniform is from Jeon All-Girls High School. Jiwoo calls her and asks what she is doing there, and she asks them why they are so shocked to see her there. Jiwoo asks her what she is doing at their school and she should go to her school. The girls are surprised and wonder if she is Jiwoo's friend, and he asks her how she got out of school to come there. Subin feels the girls staring at them and asks what they are looking at, but they turn their faces. Jiwoo asks her to hurry and go back to her school, and their teacher is going to be there soon, and she might get in trouble. Subin smiles and says he is just a kid to worry about her. Meanwhile, the teacher enters the class, and he asks her if she is Subin Lee. He was told that she would attend their school for a while, and she replied she had heard a lot about his great work and wanted to be taught him. Jiwoo is surprised to hear this, and the teacher says he doesn't know how he made this happen, but he is nervous teaching the top student of Jeon All-Girls High School. All the students, including Jiwoo, are shocked to hear that she is the top in that elite school. He then turns toward Jisuk and asks him what he is doing there, and he replies that he also wants to learn from him. The teacher calls him politely and asks him to leave their class. On the other side, Caden sleeps peacefully in his room, and the other cats jump upon him. They seem to be hungry, so he gets up and pours food for them. He also gives the gray cat food and asks him to eat. He again goes to sleep and thinks he is constantly tired, possibly because he used up too much energy at once. On the other hand, Seokcheol was informed that Jisuk was at school right now, and he had been off the grid during the entire break, yet he had come to school. He asks his men to go, and they finally get to beat him up now. One of them exclaims that he can't imagine Jisuk losing in a fight, but he is sure he is no match for Seokcheol. They think Seokcheol is just a monster, and they see him crush a billiard ball, and not even professional MMA fighters can do that. Everyone knows that Seokcheol fought and won against 10 people, but that wasn't all. Those 10 people kept hitting him, but he stood there and took all their punches as if they were nothing. He even got hit by a truck while chasing one down and went flying in the air, but he got back up on his feet, alive and well. They are happy that no one can beat such a person, and Jisuk is done for. One of them is worried about him and asks if he will be okay, but he replies that it is none of their business, and if Jisuk hadn't betrayed them, then they wouldn't have gone through all that humiliation. They think those two are bound to fight anyway, so it's just happening earlier than expected, and they did nothing wrong. Besides, they are not friends with him anymore, so they don't care about him, whether he lives or not. On the other side, Seokcheol goes outside the school, where they all come out. Subin is making fun of it and asks what that was earlier and why he is not saying anything. She makes fun of and reapers his expressions when he says to the teacher that he wants to learn from him. She then laughs loudly and says he must be so embarrassed, getting kicked out after all that acting, and if she were him, she would wish the ground would swallow him up. A boy tells Seokcheol about Jisuk and says he really came to school today. Subin exclaims, judging from the lack of the usual comeback, she can see that he is ashamed of himself. She asks him to say that line again and considers her a teacher. Meanwhile, Seokcheol reaches there and blocks their path, and they seem surprised to see him. He removes his hoodie and says his name is Seokcheol, and he is sure that he has heard of him before. He exclaims he was looking for him the whole summer break, but he was nowhere to be found. Eventually, they bump into each other, and he asks Jisuk why he is avoiding him. Jisuk is surprised at him, and Seokcheol asks him to come and starts the fight. Suddenly, Jisuk kicks him and makes him fall to the ground, while his boys are shocked at this. Jisuk asks who he is, and he is annoyed enough today. His boys seem scared and change their path. Jiwoo asks him if he knows him, and he replies that he knows a boy like him. They plan to eat ramyeon at Jiwoo's place and buy some snacks on the way. Seokcheol's friends are watching them leave quietly and are very scared of him. On the other side, In-hyuk tells Ji-young that Jiwoo is Caden's apprentice, and she assumes that he has something to do with him. Based on Jiwoo's electrical attributes and Caden's recent whereabouts, she speculated that she didn't expect them to be in a mentor-apprentice relationship. According to Caden, it happened very recently. Meanwhile, a man informs them that Mr. Suman Kang from Baekdu is there to see them. After some time, he is at their office and sits against each other. He thinks Ji-young is still as proud as ever, and she certainly deserves to be, with such power. He can see why all the young awakened ones are after her. She is just the beautiful chairwoman of the great Shinhwa. In-hyuk starts the conversation and asks him what brought him there, and he replies that he has a favor to ask of Shinhwa, and he wants to search their district in search of his father since they have found his traces nearby. Ji-young asks him if he means Mr. Dusik is there, and he replies that he often travels on a whim, but as his son, he can't help but worry. After some time, he stands on the edge of a building when a man comes to him. He asks him if he has found any traces of his father, and he replies that all they found is that he had left the academy. Mr. Suman says he has made up the excuse of searching for his father and asks him to make sure Shinhwa doesn't catch on to them. They are looking for someone else and tell him that he heralded they just arrived, and he didn't put a tail on them in case they noticed, so he couldn't find out where they were headed. Mr. Suman smiles and says they are probably searching this area or near the Union. He wondered why they dispatched another personnel on top of the Klein brothers, but now he sees it was to find Dr. Deline, the professor. At the same time, Seokjeol and his friends are at a place, and he is shocked at what just happened to him. He wonders how a single knee can knock him out in the stomach. He thinks he is completely fine even after he got hit by a car, but he can't accept this, and he fights him again. Suddenly, they saw Subin walking there and recognized her as Jisuk's friend. He calls her Jisuk's girlfriend, but she turns back and kicks him with all his might. She throws him out of the stairs, and he gets unconscious. She is angry because he called her Jisuk's girlfriend. After that, he seems very angry and breaks many rocks. Mr. Sumin is watching them from a distance and wonders if he is an awakened one. Seokjeol thinks he is strong, but those two kids knock him out. Mr. Sumin comes to him and asks what he is doing, and he gets that he is young and needs to let off some steam now and then, but he shouldn't use his powers out in public like this. Seokjeol angrily says he doesn't need a fluffy duffy, telling him what to do and asking him to get out of there. Mr. Sumin asks him which group he is affiliated with, and since he has seen using his power there, he asks if he belongs to Shinhwa. Seokjeol doesn't understand and asks what he is talking about. Mr. Sumin asks him if he doesn't know that he is an awakened one, but Seokjeol tries to attack him and asks him to get out of there. Mr. Sumin blocks his attack using his power, and he cannot move his arm. Mr. Sumin exclaims he didn't expect to run into an undiscovered awakened one there, and he likes him to take him to Baekdu since he found him out in Shinhwa's district, which will cause nothing but trouble. Seokjeol tries to attack him again, but he uses his awakened power to make him fly in the air. Mr. Sumin asks him not to make a fuss and stay still, and he might be strong among regular people, but awakened ones, he is not that special. Seokjeol is floating in the air, and he wonders what awakened ones he is talking about. Mr. Sumin calls in Hyuk and says he found an awakened one in his district, and he seems not to have realized that he is an awakened one. In Hyuk asks him where they are, and they say they will reach him in no time. He then informs Jiyoung that Mr. Sumin Kang just reported that he found an awakened one who is unaware of his powers in their district. Jiyoung says Mr. Sumin is a lot different from Baekdu's leader, Mr. Supal Kang, so it's pretty challenging to figure out what he is up to. She says other Baekdu members would have taken the newly found awakened one with them, saying that they have the right to do so as the ones who saw them. Mr. In Hyuk says he is different from his brother, Mr. Supal Kang, and he heard all he cares about is helping his brother manage Baekdu. Meanwhile, she receives a text message from Jisuk, who informs her that he is sleeping over at Jiwoo's place. In Hyuk says Jisuk has changed a lot since he met Jiwoo, and she remembers the time when they were young. She asked him why he was constantly picking a fight with other kids, and he replied that they kept trying to make him fight her. They said he could be the leader of Shinhwa, not her, and that they would help him become one. He told her that everyone who approached him was all the same, and they wanted him to fight her or expect something from him. He was sad and said things would have been different if Mom and Dad had been still alive, and she wouldn't have had to lead Shinhwa, and people would have been less interested in him. He told her he would attend the meetings from now on because he was sick of those people. He also asked her not to quit being a chairwoman, and she was quiet. He apologizes to her because she didn't want this either. One day, he came to her and asked if he could have his allowance. He said he needed money to hang out with his friends, and she was just surprised. In Hyuk calls her now and asks if something is wrong, and she replies that she must drop by somewhere. On the other side, Subin tells him that she bumped into that weird guy on the way home, and he suddenly called her his girlfriend. Jisuk also gets angry at this and says he dares to call her his girlfriend and asks her if she just let him off the hook like that. Subin smiles and says she made him pay for his words, and he says she should have made him knock on death's door. Meanwhile, Wooin calls them and says he is not wrong because she is his girlfriend with a space in between. They both stare at him and ask him not to play games with them. Suddenly, someone knocked at their door, and Jiwoo told them that it was Jiyoung. They wonder why she came by his house at this hour, while Kaden was trying to sleep and thought these kids were so loud. She brought a lot of snacks for them, and Jisuk asked her why she was there, and she replied that she was just in the area. Jiwoo thanked her for the snack and said these would be good for a few days. She thinks she will get more if they are insufficient next time. After that, they are quiet, and Jiyoung says she is leaving. Jiwoo calls her from behind and asks her to wait. He then takes her to the other side and apologizes for not telling them about Mr. Caden and lying to her. He is ashamed that he lets them down when Mr. In-hyuk and her have been good to her. Ji-young understands him and says he has to be careful, and she understands his situation. Moreover, he handled the situation very well, and Caden's existence can be dangerous for him. However, he has put her mind at ease, and now she knows he can hide such important matters from others. Ji-woo gets quiet at this, and she says she actually came to thank him. Ji-woo asks what she is thanking him for, and she replies she has never heard Jisuk addressing anyone by his friend before. She also saw him smile for the first time since their parents passed away. Ji-woo is surprised to know that, and Ji-young says it's all thanks to him. Meanwhile, Jisuk and Subin are trying to listen to their conversation with evil smiles on their faces. Subin sends Ji-woo's mobile message to Isol, saying he misses her. On the other hand, at the Union, Mr. Park is informed that the professor, Dr. Deline, has escaped and injured many of his men. He asks them not to tell Wooin about this until they figure everything out. The following day, when Wooin comes out of his home, Mr. Park is already there and asks him to go with him, and he will give him a ride. Wooin refuses him, saying he stops by here and there to feed the stray cats on his way to school. Mr. Park asks him why he won't stay at the place the Union provided him, and he replies that he likes this place better and it's more comfortable for him. They are now walking to the school, and Mr. Park thinks it doesn't seem like the professor got in touch with Wooin after he fled. He wonders why he escaped in the first place because he was the one who made a deal to cooperate with the Union for Wooin's sake. He is sure the professor knows better than anyone that this would get Wooin in trouble. Wooin asks him what brought him there, and he replies he was just in the area and wanted to say hello to him. Wooin starts walking, and Mr. Park remembers the last night when he was informed that the Klein brothers had also escaped along with Dr. Deline. His secretary told him that the director of the higher-ups was pressuring them to lock up the professor's apprentice. Mr. Park says Wooin is only a kid and asks him to just put a tail on him instead. However, the man says the higher-ups won't be happy about that, and things will get more complicated if they lose the professor's apprentice as well as him. They don't even have a single clue to his whereabouts. Meanwhile, Subin, Ji-woo, and Jisuk find and greet him while they are on the way. They call him instructor, and he remembers they sometimes called him that back at the academy. Subin asks him what brings him there so early in the morning. Mr. Park replies he was in the area and asks her what she is doing there. She tells him that she is attending their school for a while. Jisuk feeds the cats and says he brings the best food for them. Subin appreciates him and says he is becoming a real sucker for cats. Mr. Park leaves them, saying they all are doing well and his business there is done. He then calls someone and asks him to assign their agents to Wooin for protection, but for surveillance. The man tries to tell him that the higher-ups are very dissatisfied with this, and he replies that he will take responsibility if things go wrong. On the other side, Isol reaches outside Ji-woo's school and waits for him to come outside. She is shocked by his text the last night and wonders what she should reply to him. She thinks he may be mad at her because she left him on read. Meanwhile, they all come to her, and Ji-woo says hello while Subin and Jisuk smirk. Isol is surprised to see Subin there and thinks, from what she knows, that they don't go to the same school. Ji-woo asks her what brings her there, and she replies she got a message last night saying he missed her. Ji-woo is surprised at this, and Subin interrupts and says she messaged her that she missed her yesterday. Her phone was out of battery, so she used his phone, and Isol was shocked to hear this. Subin exclaims it's good to see her, and she misses her badly. Isol is shocked at this, while Subin is smiling and says she is the one who missed her, not Ji-woo, but she gets angry about this. She abuses them and says they are the worst and she will kill them all, but they try to act innocent and just smile at her. Isol then starts running away from them, and Subin thinks she just wants to use this as an excuse to let her meet Ji-woo again. She also runs behind her, and Jisuk follows them while they are laughing. Ji-woo and Wooin just stand there surprisingly, and he asks him if he is coming over to his place, but he replies that he is going to pay a visit to his professor. Ji-woo says he can come to his house if he has time after meeting him. After that, when he goes to the Union, an agent tells him that he can't meet the professor and doesn't know the reason. Mr. Park appears there and says the professor is busy and is unavailable at the moment. Wooin asks him why he can't see him, and he replies that it's going to take a while, and he will get in touch with him when the professor is available. Wooin returns, and Mr. Park sees him sadly. He then receives a call from his team, who informs him that they have found a trace of the professor. Two men are talking to each other, and the director is on his way. Meanwhile, a weird man appears there and asks if they found him already. They point their guns toward him, and he exclaims it looks like the Union in this country is more well organized than he thought. They try to pull the trigger, but they can't, and he exclaims that they shouldn't be pointing such dangerous weapons at him. He turns their guns toward them, and their arms seem out of control. After that, they shoot themselves due to his awakened power, while the professor comes to him and says there is no need to complicate things by killing the Union's agents. He says there is no pushover in the Union, but he replies that they are no match for him. After some time, Mr. Park reaches there, and they provide his men with first aid. His men inform him that they will make it, but it will take some time for them to regain consciousness. Judging from their wounds, they suppose that the professor attacked them. On the other side, Mr. Suman is also informed that the Klein brothers have run away with Dr. Delane and attacked the Union. He is surprised and says they have gone that far to save the Klein brothers. He asks his man to look for them and not let the Union know that they are, though. Suddenly, Seokjul comes to him and asks if he can't join his group. He says he is cut out of the group, Shinhwa. He took him too, and they told him this and that, but it only gave him a headache, so he just wanted to join their group. Mr. Suman says he can't join any group as he wishes, and even if he could, he should still go to Shinhwa. He may not be aware of this, but Shinhwa is the best group in this country. Seokjul says he likes him and has already told Shinhwa he is going with him. He asks him a question and says he said his ability enhances the durability and power of his body, and Mr. Suman says that is why he was okay after getting hit by a car. However, he is confused as to why two guys knocked him out and wondered how this can be possible. Meanwhile, Jisuk and Subin pass by them with Wooin and Jiwoo, and he points toward them and says that the evil-looking boy and the girl are blue. They knocked him out in just one move, and Mr. Suman says he can believe him now. He reveals that there are only two teenagers who are as strong as them in this country, and Seokjul is shocked to know that they are also awakened. He says he doesn't know about the other two, but he pointed out Jisuk and Subin Lee. Moreover, Jisuk is affiliated with Shinhwa, which he took him to, and he now realizes why he is so strong. He then tells him that he wants to join his group, and Jisuk being part of Shinhwa made them even less appealing. Mr. Suman asks him if Shinhwa asked him to join them, and he says he still chooses his group. Conversely, Subin is sad because Isol has been ignoring her texts since yesterday and is not even picking up her phone. Jisuk says if she were in her place, then she also wouldn't reply to her. After that, they look at each other and laugh evilly. Wooin says he has to drop by somewhere, so he should get going, and Subin asks him to stay for a few minutes before he goes, and he has to leave soon anyway. But he doesn't listen to them and leaves by saying he will see them tomorrow. Jisuk says he also has to leave early because In-hyuk told him to hurry back, while Jiwoo observes that Wooin seemed a little down today. He wonders if something happened between him and his professor yesterday. On the other side, Mr. Park thinks there were no casualties, including the agents who were guarding the cells, and to dispose of evidence, then it would have been better to kill everyone. He thinks it may be because he didn't want to create more trouble for Wooin. Meanwhile, he can see Wooin coming toward him, and he turns back and says he will need to wait a little longer to see Dr. Delane, and he will let him know when the time is right. Wooin asks him if he informed him about him, and Mr. Park lies, saying that he wants him to tell him that he will see him after he is done with the work. Wooin asks him if something happened to him and says the professor isn't the type to ask others to pass a message on. He asks Mr. Park what happened to him, but he asks him to go back home. Wooin says he has every right to know what happened, and Mr. Park informs him that he escaped along with the Klein brothers. They are investigating right now, and he will let him know when they have more information. He tells Wooin that they have nothing figured out yet, and asks him to live his life like nothing happened. Wooin is going back when Subin sees him and says he should have come with her if he wanted to come there. Wooin doesn't reply to her and goes downstairs. She is shocked, standing there and going to him. He is appalled that his professor escaped, leaving him behind for the first time in his life. He remembers the time when he lived at Hope Orphanage, and a man told someone about him that a child is more robust and faster than any adult. He also healed faster than the others. They took him to a laboratory and experimented on him, and he heard a doctor saying that he was an important discovery in the medical field and that they needed to study him more. They planned to keep him confidential, and since he was an orphan, no one would find out about him. They took him under supervision, and one day, the professor came to him and found out that they were experimenting on a little kid. He asked Wuhan if he wanted to come with him because he would get nothing but pain there. He also showed him his powers and said he was also an awakened one like him. He then took him to his own laboratory and told him about his experiment. He told him that his experiment could save millions of lives if successful and make people healthier. One day, he told him that Wuhan reminded him of his daughter, and he asked him about where she was at that time. He revealed his daughter was dead, and if she were an awakened one like them, then she would have made it through her illness. If she were alive, she would be of his age. The professor asked him if he wanted to learn about his experiment, but he refused by saying he had already been taught force control and how to use his power, which was enough for him. Wuhan asks him why he always hides his work from him, and he replies that there is no need for him to walk the same path as he does. He didn't want him to pass through all the trouble so he could be a fugitive his whole life like him. At present, all flashbacks pass through his mind, and he walks with tears in his eyes. On the other side, Jiwoo and Kaden are at their home, and he says this is the first time they have been by themselves in a long time. Jiwoo replies that Jisuk and Subin left earlier than he expected. Kaden tells him that there have been awakened ones nearby since a little while ago, and he thinks they are from Shinhwa, and they are spread out near this house. It looks like they are protecting him. At the same time, In-hyuk informs Ji-young that he has checked that Jisuk is home and dispatched their agents to Jiwoo's house. The Union also assigned their agents to Wuhan's. He asks her not to worry, and the Klein brothers are on the loose, but with Union on their tail, they won't have the time to mess with the kids. Even if they do, they have protocols set up to respond immediately. Ji-young asks him if one of Jisuk's friends, Wuhan, was an apprentice of Dr. Deline and gets quiet at his answer. At the same time, Kaden comes out of the house and thinks he is right that the energy coming from them is definitely that of Shinhwa's, and judging from their position and their line of sight, they are protecting Jiwoo, not monitoring him. Meanwhile, they see Kaden and say it's Jiwoo's cat, and a cat that big and fat isn't common. They comment on his fatness and wonder how a cat can be so big, and say he maybe was overfed as a kitten. Kaden walks away, thinking it's not new because everyone says the same thing after seeing him. One of them says his fat jiggles every time he takes a step, and Kaden gets angry at this and wonders if he should beat the hell out of them. He enters the home, and Jiwoo asks him what he found out. He replies that they are agents from Shinhwa, and they are definitely there to protect him. However, he doesn't know the reason, and Jiwoo says he may be protecting him since he is his apprentice, and he said he could get in danger for that. Suddenly, Kaden remembers something and seems furious. Jiwoo asks him what happened, and he says that when he told Joyoung that he was his apprentice, she seemed to know already, which means In-hyuk blabbered about him to Ji-young. Jiwoo says she is the chairwoman, and he has to tell her everything, but Kaden says he will not leave him the time he sees him. At the same time, In-hyuk gets a horrible feeling suddenly and starts sweating. The next day, they are informed that Wuhan missed school, and he is not even picking up his phone. Subin tells them that he has been acting weird since yesterday, and she bumped into him in the Union, and he was so preoccupied with something that he didn't even hear her calling. She got curious, so she called him last night, but he didn't pick up, and he has been out of touch since then. After that, they decide to go to his place. When they reach there, they are shocked to see that he lives alone in a place like that, and this isn't even a proper living space, but just a basement. Meanwhile, Wuhan comes there and says it's not that place. Jiwoo asks why he didn't come to school today, and he replies that he has things to do. Jiwoo asks him if something is wrong with him, and he has been acting weird since visiting his professor. Wuhan doesn't answer him, and Subin and Jisuk also worry about seeing him. Jiwoo again asks him if something bad is happening and if he doesn't want to tell them. Wuhan replies that it's not that, but he is just not used to sharing stories with others. He looks toward his friends and members when the professor tells him that he can see that he is doing well with his new friend, and he always has the same expression on his face, but after all those years, he can tell the difference. He is glad to see him happy, and Wooen tells them that his professor is Dr. Deline. Subin is shocked that he is his apprentice, while Jisuk is unaware of his name. Subin tells him that he is an awakened one who wants to conduct illegal experiments, and Jisuk asks Jiwoo if he knows about that. Jiwoo asks Wooen if something has happened to him, and Wooen reveals that he ran away, and that the Union is after him. Subin now realizes that this is why everyone in the Union has been all over the place, and it explains why Mr. Park told him to go straight home. Wooen says the professor may be a wanted criminal, but to him, he is like a parent. Jiwoo asks him if he is trying to find him, and Wooen wants to ask him face to face if he really meant to leave him behind. They all are quiet for a while, and then Jiwoo asks him to look for the professor together, and he couldn't have gone far with the Union on his tail. Jisuk and Subin also come forward and say they will join them in the chase. After that, they ask him if he has any idea where he might be, and he thinks about taking a look at nearby places. At the same time, an agent calls Mr. Park and informs him that the kids are at Wooen's place, and the Shinhwa agents protecting Jiwoo are also on standby in proximity. Mr. Park orders them to follow the kids wherever they go. They are watching them from the roof, and Subin asks if they can shake them off. Wooen says the professor is a wanted criminal who fled from the Union, and he is already deeply involved and asks others not to get involved in this. Jisuk says they are only looking for his parents, which has nothing to do with the Union. He uses his awakened power and asks them to get started. He gives them a little of his wind and says they will be able to jump further with the help of this. In that case, they can escape the Union's agents. They all jump from the roof and start their search mission. On the other side, the weird man and the professor are hiding at a place, and he says it is bad that Shinhwa is after them. He smiles and says they have no choice but to use them. He says he wasn't planning on using them there and wanted to use them better. He exclaims he was able to control them reasonably thanks to their poor condition. On the other hand, they all look for the professor and go to different places but can't find him anywhere. They check any abandoned places and parks where his symptoms can be, but he is nowhere. After that, they go to a home, but there are no signs of any recent visitors. They have been doing this for a while but have had no luck so far. Jisuk's phone rings off the hook, and it looks like they notice they are gone. Subin says she turned her phone off. Jisuk liked her idea and also turned off his phone. Wooen seems very sad, and Subin asks him why he has made a long face, saying that they will find his professor in no time. He says he is just worried that he got them guys into trouble, and they say he worries for nothing. Jiwoo calls him and asks how many places are left on his list, and he replies there are 4. Jiwoo suggests they should take a look at them. Wooen looks toward the sky and says it's getting late, so they should split up and search the places separately, and he will send them the address. Jiwoo says they will get in touch with one another after checking those places, and Subin asks them to call them if there is no trace left, saying they should not confront him when they find him. All of them split up, while at the same time, Mr. Park and In Hyuk are looking for them, but they can't reach any one of them. However, there is no sign of forced entry or a fight, so he is sure the kids shook off the agents, and he remembers Wooen's face and thinks they may be rushing to find the professor for Wooen. They are not aware that the Klein brothers escaped as well, and they kept that from them so as not to scare them, but the situation is getting worse. Conversely, the weird man has hypnotized all the agents and orders them to go in some direction. They all start running, and the professor asks him if he is trying to get the Klein brothers to make a scene so they can escape while Shinhwa and the Union are busy taking care of them. The professor says neither his client nor his group would be happy about him exposing the existence of awakened ones to the public. He smiles and says it's the Klein brothers making the commotion, not him. So he won't be responsible for this as long as the professor keeps his mouth shut. Suddenly, 2 agents surround them, and he asks if they are also from the Union. They are surprised to see another man aside from Dr. Deline. He uses his awakened powers and asks them just to remember that they have found nothing. He asks them to leave them alone and look in the back alley. At the same time, Wooen reaches the address Wooen gave him, and it looks like nobody has been there for a while. He thinks about telling others that he is not there as well and starts his phone. As soon as he turns his phone on, there are a lot of missed calls, all from Mr. Caden. He asks him where he is and why he is not still at home, and he is just surprised at this. On the other hand, Caden practices in his home when he receives a notification. He jumps toward his phone and receives the message that he had turned off for a while. He also tells him that Wuen's professor escaped the Union, so they are searching for him now. Caden remembers Wuen's professor and how strong he is, and he wonders if this is the reason the agents are trying to protect Jiwoo. He asks them why they are looking for him, and he is getting annoyed because it is getting difficult for him to type with his big paws. He shouts at the other cats and asks them to go away since he is doing delicate work, and Jiwoo thinks there are a lot of mistakes in his typing, which means he must be upset. Suddenly, he hears an explosion from a side, which feels slightly different from other regular explosions. Conversely, Caden wonders why Jiwoo suddenly disappears between their conversation and texts him repeatedly, but he doesn't reply. He wonders why he is not reading his messages this time and hopes that he will be fine. There is an explosion in the building, which causes a lot of destruction and injures many agents. The Klein brothers have attacked them and seem to be in full control of that weird man. At the same time, Mr. Suman and his man are also following them and say they have the location, but it seems like the Klein brothers aren't with them any longer. Suddenly, he remembers something and wonders if Lobern is using the Klein brothers as bait. One of them starts his destruction when some agents appear there to stop him. They are shocked and wonder when the Klein brothers were this strong and all their agents went down in seconds. They seem scared of them and wonder what they should do. They decide to isolate this space and prevent further damage until backup arrives. One of them says that to do this, they all need to focus solely on that, and who will deal with him during that time. They can't possibly put up a fight against him, not even if all of them attack together. In order to keep their identities concealed and prevent any harm to non-awakened ones, they need to generate spatial isolation, and they are the only ones who can do that around this area. They all understand this situation, and one of their seniors asks others to get to their positions and activate their spatial isolation devices. Suddenly, one of the Klein brothers throws his attack on them, and they are shocked at what they should do. In the meantime, Jiwoo appears from the side and blocks his attack. He tries to attack him again with his fire, but Jiwoo jumps backward at super speed. He is surprised to see him and wonders how he was there when he was arrested a while ago. An agent calls him and says they can't help him fight because they need to spread out and isolate this space. Moreover, they are not strong enough to be a help anyway. They are shocked when Jiwoo says they, awakened ones, are obligated to protect the regular citizens from awakened powers and are to prioritize keeping their identity hidden from the public. He says he is also awakened, so he should also abide by that principle. They are surprised and think they were told that Jiwoo didn't even know he was an awakened one until very recently, and they are surprised that he has grown mentally so much in such a short period. The Klein brother attacks Jiwoo, and he asks others to hurry and go, and he will try to buy some time for them. They all move from there, and the Klein brother tries to stop them when Jiwoo reaches him and blocks his attack. After that, he gathers the power in his hand and tries to punch him, but Jiwoo dodges him again successfully. He thinks his attacks aren't damaging him, and it's as if the durability of his body is on a whole another level. He can see that the area's isolation has been started, and he thinks as long as they keep it isolated, there won't be any additional damage done to this neighborhood. He moves toward him again to attack when suddenly Jisuk appears there and attacks him with his awakened wind. He is also surprised to see him there and asks Jiwoo if he escaped from the Union. Jiwoo asks him if he can stall him so he can move those people who have passed out, and it will only take a second. Jisuk is surprised that he thinks of people against a monster like him. He apologizes to him for no reason, and Jisuk asks him to be quick and take those people to some safe place when he is stalling him. They start fighting while Jiwoo helps the unconscious people and moves them all. The Klein brother tries to attack Jiwoo when Jisuk appears from the side and says he is right there. Their attacks collide with each other, but he is much stronger than Jisuk, and the fire is about to touch him when an ice barrier appears from a side and saves him. Subin also reaches there and is shocked to see the situation. She also asks Jisuk to remember that she just saved him, but he exclaims he was fine on his own. Jiwoo appears there and informs him that he has moved all of them. In the meantime, the Klein brothers have destroyed Subin's ice wall and created a fire circle around them. Suddenly, there is a vast destruction, and they all move to some safe place to save them. Subin recognizes him and asks if he isn't one of the Klein brothers, and he has obliterated the place. In the meantime, the second brother has reached out to the other agents and blocks their path. He creates many fire flames and is about to attack them when someone appears from a side and destroys all of his flames with his wind attribute. Hayek appears there and asks where his elder brother is and why he is alone. He orders his men to spread out and contain the area. They follow his orders when one of the Klein brothers tries to attack them. Hayek gathers his power of wind and diffuses his fire attribute. He asks him not to mess with them and to focus on him since he is the only one he needs to deal with. He asks him how he dares to use his powers without creating spatial isolation. He uses his powers and creates isolation in just an instant. The Klein brother is shocked to see his immense power, and Hayek asks him if he really thinks they are just a bunch of pushovers. This time, he prepares a significant attack and throws it toward Hayek, but he dodges all of his attacks. He again swings his head and attacks him, and this time, it causes destruction there. He smirked at thinking his attack was successful, but Hayek appeared there and said he was too weak to look down on them like that. This time, he attacks him with his full might and defeats him, saying he should not pick fights if that is all he has. He seems in a very bad condition and has no power to fight again. On the other side, they all are fighting with the other brother and using all they have. He is so powerful that he breaks through Subin's ice weapon. She seems worried because she has no strength to attack him. While he comes to her to attack, Jiwoo and Jisuk push him behind through close combat, but they are still no match for him. Jiwoo asks Subin if she is alright, and she thinks this is so bad because their opponent is one hell of a notorious criminal. He is fighting against all three of them like it's nothing, and Jisuk says he knew he was so strong from fighting him before. He is 3 against 1, and Jiwoo says he will fight him in close proximity, and they too attack him with all of their might. Subin stops him and says she knows he is fast, but it's still a long shot, and he is different from kids like Sachon. Jiwoo says he can't do any damage to him, and they need to do it while he restrains him at close range, and they attack him from afar. Subin says this means he will have to fight him all alone, and besides that, he can get hurt from their attacks. Jiwoo says he can dodge all of their attacks, and Jisuk tells him that they can't take him down with whatever skills they have been using up until now. This means that he will have to hold him off until Subin and Jisuk gather enough power. Subin is shocked that Jisuk agrees to this, and Jiwoo thinks he knows this will be hard, and that this is the only shot they have at the moment. Jisuk says he will trust him and gather up power without moving an inch from there. Jiwoo is determined to think he can do this and has to do it to save their lives. Subin and Jisuk gather their powers, and the Klein brother rushes toward them to attack. Jiwoo moves with his super speed, reaches him in no time, and starts fighting him. He has to attack as hard as possible and doesn't go for Jisuk and Subin. However, it's scorching hot around him, and his fists feel like they are on fire every time he throws a punch. But he can't stop until Subin and Jisuk gather enough power to take him down. They are still gathering their powers, and he moves faster to dodge them. Due to multiple attacks, his arms hurt too much, but he doesn't stop. After a while, Jisuk calls him from behind, and they have gathered enough amount of energies. They throw their attacks toward them, and Jiwoo thinks if he dodges them now, he needs to hold them off until they attack. The Klein brother is about to punch him when he closes his distance with him, but their attacks reach them with their full might. There is an explosion, and Jiwoo reaches them back using his super speed. Jisuk appreciates Jiwoo for his bravery, and he just smiles at this. Subin hits him because she is still angry at him for putting his life in danger. However, they are shocked to see that the Klein brothers are still fine and say it is ridiculous of him to get beaten by many kids. However, he becomes conscious through their attack, which happens because of them. At the same time, Kaden is looking for Jiwoo because he hasn't replied back for over 30 minutes since their conversation got cut off like that. He thinks something definitely happened to him, since he usually replies back within 5 minutes and messages him uncontrollably. Conversely, the other Klein brother is conscious and thinks he was controlled by Lobern the whole time. He can feel that his body has been injured, and those kids have caused all those wounds. He appreciates them and says they all have exceptional powers when they are only in their late teens. He wants to take them with him, but since he is not at his best, nor in his good books, that seems impossible. Jisuk says they should just part there and go on their way. And Subin also exclaims that they are all busy with their own stuff. He recognizes Subin as she is from the Union, judging by her use of ice, and he remembers fighting Jisuk that he is the brother of Shinhwa's Ji Young-yu. He smiles and says he has to pay both groups back for what they have done to him and wonders how they would take it if he got rid of them. After experiencing how strong they are, he has a good feeling that they are pretty important in those two groups, so if two of them die by his hands, then he is sure that will make them miserable as hell. He throws a powerful attack toward them while they try to dodge them with their attributes, but the fire is so immense that they are unable to control it. In the meantime, he reaches Subin and is about to grab her neck when Jiwoo jumps up from his place and tries to attack him. He grabs his hand and says he is the one who annoyed him the most. Jiwoo pushes behind to save himself, and he observes with his speed. He must have been able to overpower opponents with similar levels of combat skill. But when the opponent is much stronger or has significantly more experience than him, then this is the most useless skill one could have. Jiwoo gets seriously injured because of his large attack. He is about to attack him again, but Subin throws her ice toward him to dodge him. Their powers collide with each other, and his fireball escapes from it and hits the ground near Subin. Jiwoo tries to save her, but he can't move because he has already overused his powers, and the hit he took did too much damage. He now turns towards Subin and thinks he can't fully use his powers, and the damage he got from those kids was greater than he thought. He has no time to waste and thinks Jiwoo can't move so that he will get rid of Subin first. She tries to attack him again with her ice, while Jisuk again appears and attacks with his wind. He gets annoyed and thinks he can't fully control his power and that these kids have injured him. Meanwhile, Subin moves and cuts him with her ice weapon. She is worried because the ice melted, so the attack didn't work too well. He reacts in time and attacks her, and this time, she can't able to dodge him and falls to the ground badly. She gets seriously injured, and Jisuk and Jiwoo are shocked to see his condition. He again rushes toward her, saying he will burn her. Jiwoo is trying to move, but he can't. He remembers when Kaden told him that there could be a brief moment to regain power through force control when he ran out of energy during a fight. No matter how short it may be, but he needs to grab that chance and use it to its fullest. He thinks if he hadn't just sat there doing nothing while focusing on Subin and Jisuk, he could have recuperated enough energy to move. Meanwhile, Jisuk calls him and asks why he is attacking them when his sister is the one who got him locked up. He calls him a loser and asks him to fight her instead. He makes him angry, saying he is acting cool when he finds out his sister crushed him. On the other side, Loburn and the professor are walking at a place, and he says the Klein brothers must be doing a great job making a scene because he doesn't see any agents from the Union or Shinhwa. At this rate, they will leave there in no time. Then the rest will be easy. The professor thinks he won't get to see Wooin ever again. Suddenly, he is shocked to hear Wooin's voice and wonders why he is there. Loburn seems to enjoy the situation and asks Wooin if Dr. Deline is his professor. At the same time, the other Klein brother turns toward Jiwoo since he hits his nerve by asking him to fight his sister instead. He attacks Jisuk, asking him to shut up, while he tries to dodge him. There is an explosion there, which results in him being injured. He reaches him, hits him again, and says he will kill him all in the most painful way possible. Jisuk falls to the ground, and he stands on his arm and breaks it. He then grabs his hair and pulls it upward. He wonders how Ji-young's expression will change when she finds out he died a miserable death. He is about to grab his neck when Subin attacks him from behind, but he grabs her ice by dodging her attack. He asks her if she still doesn't understand his opponent's power and how strong he can be, or if they have never experienced pain so bad that they just wished they were dead. Meanwhile, Jiwoo is regaining his force control and thinks he still needs a little more time to move. Suddenly, he can feel Jisuk trying to say something to him. He understands his words, and he asks him to run away from there. He is shocked that Jisuk tells him such a thing and remembers when Ji-young tells him that a friend holds a very special meaning to an awakened one because one single betrayal could cost him his life. This is why an awakened one only calls someone who they can trust their life with a friend. He tells her that he has never done anything special to earn such trust from Jisuk, and she reveals that Jisuk told him that he thought he could be friends with someone as brave as him when he fearlessly went to save Wooin, knowing he could die. He actually thinks of him as a friend, and now he asks him to run away. Jiwoo gets up, thinking he will never leave his friend behind. Jisuk wonders what he is thinking, and whether he should use that little energy he has left to run. He gathers his energy and calls the Klein brothers to fight him again. He asks him if he still thinks he can pull this off in this state. He exclaims that they could not beat him even if they were at their best, since they were simply on another level. He releases an immense amount of energy, and Jiwoo thinks he is right because all he can do now is a single strike at max speed. But even that won't work as well as it did on Suchin, since this guy is much stronger than him. His energy will be barely enough to get him through his flames, but he still has to make it work. His opponent laughs at him and asks him to give it a try to his remaining power, releasing an immense amount of fire. Jiwoo wonders if he can punch him, and even if he gets through his firestorm at his top speed, he won't be fast enough to do any damage to him. In the meantime, Kaden reaches there and is shocked to see one of the Klein brothers there. He can see Subin and Jisuk injured and realizes he got them all. He sees Jiwoo and thinks he is trying to give it one last shot, but he is not fast enough to get through the fire and knock his opponent out. Suddenly, he felt a wind stream around Jiwoo's legs, and he remembered that Jisuk could use the wind to move faster. He helps him move faster and asks him to go for his last attack, while the Klein brothers exclaim that whatever they are trying to pull off will not work against him. He exclaims it won't change the fact that he can't even make it through the firestorm. In the meantime, Subin uses her ice and sets off the firestorm near him. He looks toward her furiously, and Kaden observes that she weakened the fire using an opposing element, and his firestorm has less power now. Now is the time for Jiwoo to act, and he passes through the storm and disappears in front of him. When he reaches him, he wonders where Jiwoo went, thinking his friends made this chance for him, and he will make it work even if this breaks his whole body. He strikes the Klein brother with his full might, and he can feel electricity passing through his body. Jiwoo punches and pushes him away with his full might. There is a large explosion, and it harms his arm, too, while their opponent has been defeated badly. He falls to the ground and gets unconscious, and Jisuk and Subin are happy that their plan actually worked. Kaden watches all this as Jisuk helps Jiwoo get faster with his wind, and Subin weakens the opponent's awakened power by using her ice and smirks at thinking the kids played well. They support each other, and Jisuk can see him unconscious and wonders if this is over now. Subin shouts at him and asks if he doesn't know. Saying something like that never helps end the situation. She asks him what they will do if he gets up again, and he says they impress him. Kaden is watching them and thinks they are just fools. They go to Jiwoo and ask if he is alright, and he replies his arm hurts really badly, and he has not energy left. Kaden thinks this is not a surprise since it's natural. He has no energy left and a broken arm after attacking with all his might and overstretching himself to do damage. Suddenly, he remembers Wooin and says they must find him since he might also be in danger. Conversely, Wooin asks Professor about what happened back at the Union, while Lobern asks him to explain why their higher-ups never hear about his apprentice. The professor says he has no apprentice but asks why this body called him professor. The professor says this is just a boy who used to run his errands. A few days ago, when he went to the professor, he said he didn't know he was hiding there and looked all over the place for him. When he saw him, the professor thought the higher-ups had sent someone to look for him. He asks him if he thinks he is hiding and says he actually came by at the perfect time, and he was starting to get sick of being locked up. The professor thinks as they continue to send awakened ones to take him back, they will eventually find out about Wooin, and this will risk his life. He thinks he left him behind for a reason and asks Lobern to move, saying he doesn't have time for this. But he is shocked when Lobern says they should take Wooin with them since he needs to continue his research there anyway. He says it will be best to take someone who works for him, whether he is his apprentice, and he tries to stop him, saying they can't take a kid with them. Lobern says they can't just leave a witness behind. Suddenly, the professor attacks Wooin, throws him away, asks Lobern to stop wasting their time, and tells him he will take care of him. He moves by saying they are running out of time, but he asks him to wait, and they will make sure that he is dead. He uses his awakened power, and the professor asks him what he is doing, and he replies that he is ensuring he doesn't survive. However, before he can attack Wooin, the professor attacks him from behind and forbids him from doing so. He turns toward him and says his hunch is right, and he is his apprentice. He asks how he dares to hide such a thing from them, and he even has the guts to attack him. When the higher-ups find out, then he and his apprentice will go through hell, but the professor says they won't know if he kills him there and now. Lobern laughs at him loudly and says that just because his power isn't mainly for the offense doesn't mean he has a chance, especially with his awakened power restricted. He gives him a pill and asks him to take it, saying with this awakened power intact, he will have to be on his toes, and he doesn't want that. The professor thinks he is right because he can't use his power after taking that medicine. If it hadn't been for that, then his earlier attack would have been critical to Lobern, and he thinks he can't undo what has already been done. However, he has to get rid of Lobern in order to hide that Wuin is his apprentice. The professor releases his awakened power, and he asks if he is seriously going to do this. He reveals that he is not the only one he has to deal with. He uses his awakened power in Wuin and hypnotizes him to use it against the professor. From the looks of it, he observes the professor really cares for his apprentice, and he is sure he will be better off fighting him than him. The professor calls and asks him to snap out of it, but he gathers his power and attacks the professor. The professor dodges his attack, and Lobern exclaims that he seems strong for his age. He calls Wuin again and asks him to get out of his power, but he doesn't listen to him and attacks him again. He has caused a hole in the ground, and Lobern looks pretty impressed with him. He thinks he already has such strong ability at his age, and he has to take him with him no matter what. Wuin tries to attack him again, and the professor thinks he has got to get him under control first. By dodging his attack, he reaches and tries to stop him, thinking he didn't expect him to be so strong, but he has improved a lot. He will have to give his best to overpower Wuin, but his power seems more remarkable than his, and their attacks collide. The professor overpowered him and attacked him, and he is sad that he is hurting him again. He promised himself never to do that again, but he breaks his promise for his sake. Suddenly, Wuin attacks him again and hits his face. The professor is surprised that he attacks him, while Lobern smiles while watching them fight. In the meantime, Mr. Park appears there and asks how he dares to run amok in his district. He is surprised that Wuin is attacking his professor, and something about him seems off. The professor tells him that Wuin is being controlled, and they stare at each other. Lobern asks him who he is, or if he is also from Shinhua or the Union. He introduces himself as Seongha Park from the Union, and Lobern replies he hasn't heard of him before, judging from the fact that he didn't make a name for himself as an awakened one. He asks if he seriously makes all that grand entrance when it's just him there, while Mr. Park replies he is more than enough to take him down. Lobern laughs at him and says he is full of himself and must be pretty strong in this country. The professor says he will take care of Wuin so that he can deal with him. Mr. Park remembers when his men told him they lost none of their agents, and their wounds were not that bad either. They will have to see if they really make it through, but for now, they are all good. This means that the professor had no intention of killing or seriously hurting their agents, and now he agrees to help him. The professor thanks him, and Loberner asks what happened to him, and he is asking such a wimp against him. The professor asks him to take his word for it, and he will have no time to even care about him. He also didn't know until he was there that the awakened ones in this country are very different from what they have heard. Lobern acts unconscious and asks what in the world he is saying. Meanwhile, the professor moves swiftly, takes Wuin along with him, and thinks he has to separate themselves from Lobern so he doesn't get to mess with Wuin. Lobern tries to follow him when Mr. Park stops and says he will ask him one thing. He then gathers his energy in his hand and releases it. This creates a large pressure, and he finds it difficult to bear. He is shocked to see that he has isolated the whole space with just his hands, and Mr. Park asks him if it was he who had invaded the Union and made a mess there. He tries to use his hypnotizing skill on him, but Mr. Park reacts before him and throws his ice toward him. He asks if he thinks he will let him use his power, knowing it's mind control. He says his response is his power and how he unfiltered and attacked the Union with that. Lobern seems shocked to see him and says he is a pure nobody he has never heard of. He moves around him at his full speed and asks how he dares to look down on him. He then tries to attack him from behind, but Mr. Park hits his fist to the ground and destroys him in just one blow. His ice barrier has created a large surface area and defeats his enemy. At the same time, the professor runs while taking Wuin, but he uses his power to throw him away. He falls to the ground and thinks if he hadn't moved away from him in time, he would have hurt himself as well. Wuhan is under Lobern's control and does not consider his safety when using his powers. He is worried about him and wonders what he should do now. He remembers the time when he asked him one day why he was always there doing nothing. He asked him to go and play since he didn't need his help, but he stayed there while saying nothing. He then agreed to come and watch him, and they did their work together. He thinks it would be best for Wuhan if he dies out of his hands there. He thinks he is nothing but a worthless piece of scum to Wuhan there and puts his guard down in front of him. Wuhan is about to attack him again when Caden appears there and jumps on his shoulder. He hits him with his paw and makes him unconscious. The professor recognizes him as Caden, and he grabs his shoulder angrily and asks what is wrong with him. He asks him why he tried to die at Wuhan's hands and how he will be able to live with that. After that, Jiwoo wouldn't be okay watching his friend suffer. He threatens him, saying he will get him if he decides to kill himself again, and asks him to stay alert no matter what. He threatens him and asks if he can hear him. He leaves him, asking him to keep his words in mind. After a while, Mr. Park appears there and calls him from behind. He asks him if he took Wuhan down, and he can observe Caden watching him from behind. He tries to tell him that he is watching him constantly, and he calls Mr. Park and asks him to take him back to the Union. After that, In-hyuk informs Ji-young that they have the Klein brothers detained at the moment, but they don't seem to have anything new for them. As for Lobern, the Union took him, but he is in bad shape, so they are pushing off the interrogation. It seems like Seong-ha failed to control himself after finding out Lobern was the one who hurt all those Union agents. She asks him about the kid's condition, and he informs her that they have been hospitalized and it will take some time, but they will fully recover without a problem. After a while, she goes to Mr. Suman and apologizes to him for keeping him waiting since both Shinhwa and the Union prevented further loss thanks to him. He saved many agents at that moment and says he is glad he was of some help and that he was just passing by. He thinks it would have been Baekdu having trouble if Lobern had done more harm to Shinhwa or the Union since his brother and father made a deal with Lobern's group. In-hyuk says from the Klein brothers to Lobern, international criminals flooded into the country right under their noses, so they should thoroughly look into this matter. At the same time, Mr. Park investigates the professor and asks if they came there to help him continue his research on creating artificial awakened ones. He replies that they have always wanted him for that sole reason, since they stopped hearing from the Klein brothers who came over to find him, so they sent Lobern, and he is more fit for THSI kind of job that requires his skill rather than combat ability. Mr. Park asks him why he joined hands with Lobern when he made a deal with the Union. He asks him if it was because of Wuhan, and he gets quiet at this. Park says he can only help if he gives him an answer. He replies he wouldn't know it was because of Wuhan since he is the one who started all this. However, he went with Lobern for Wuhan's sake since if anything like this were to happen again, then Wuhan could have been their next target or a hostage to control him all they wanted. He tells him that ever since he met Wuhan, he stopped dreaming about his dead daughter. He also fell asleep without a dream, which happened because of Wuhan. He no longer had to watch himself be helpless as his baby cried in excruciating pain coming from the illness she had. He tried his experiments and thought that the process would have been much faster if he had the proper equipment and materials. At that moment, his rage towards the awakened ones who closed the door on the chance to cure numerous illnesses by turning ordinary people into awakened ones subdued a little. He was able to slowly bring himself to before losing his daughter because of Wuhan. He stopped him from coming near him because the floor was filled with pieces of glass, and they could be dangerous for him. He then taught him his force control and appreciated his achievement. He admits his mistake and says he did something wrong, so he will deal with the consequences and requests him to leave Wuhan out of this. Mr. Park says it isn't as easy as it sounds because he betrayed the Union and they suffered tremendous damage. He says there is no way Wuhan can be unaffected by this, while the professor says he has enough power within the Union to pull some strings and make that work. On the other side, they all are admitted to the Shinhwa's hospital, and Jisuk says his whole body aches like hell. Subin asks him to stop and says he has been whining over those little wounds for several hours like a baby. Jisuk gets angry and says he broke his arm because it was twisted the wrong way from the elbow down, and she would have cried her eyes out. She replies she also has many broken ribs, and one of them stabbed her lung. Jisuk says he burned himself, and the Klein brothers also left his handprint on him. Meanwhile, Jiwoo and Kaden are just watching them fight and abuse each other. After some time, they take Wooin to their room, and the doctor informs them that he has a skull fracture and also broke his neck, so he needs complete bed rest for a while. The doctor tells them that it seemed like he had been attacked pretty hard on the head, and Kaden remembers he was the one who attacked him. They are worried about his condition and wonder why he is suffering so severely. After some time, Wooin becomes conscious, and they ask about his health. He replies that he will be fine after getting some rest. He apologized to all of them for getting them injured, and he also heard that they ran into one of the Klein brothers in his search for his professor and got severely injured. It's good that they took him down, and if they hadn't, all of them could have been dead. He apologizes to them again, and Jisuk says he looks pretty ridiculous saying something like that while lying on a hospital bed. Subin says she was curious about what he would say so seriously looking like that. Jiwoo calls him and asks if he met his professor. He remembers when he saw him last time, and he promised to see him later. He tells them that he met his professor, and Jiwoo is happy because he is happy. Meanwhile, Kaden is yawning because he hasn't napped for hours. The next day, their teacher came to see them, and he was shocked to know that all four got into an accident. He asks them what they are feeling now and what the doctor said to them, and Subin says they can be discharged pretty soon. The teacher apologized to them for not asking them about their health first since he was just a little confused. They have gone into several accidents before, and it's a first for Subin. In-hyuk told them that he had given their school the perfect excuse for their injuries. The teacher calls Jisuk and says this is his third time, and he tries to act tough and says he doesn't remember the little things. He then calls Jiwoo and says it's his second time, and he is just embarrassed at this. In-hyuk appears there, and the teacher asks him if he is the one who called him. He tells him that he has called him a couple of times regarding the kids, including this once as well. The teacher is worried that he will always call him for a bad reason. He then leaves them, saying he is returning to school and coming for a short visit. He also advises them to take a rest, and they will see each other at school. In-hyuk says it looks like they are making a great recovery. Kaden opens his mouth to yawn when he puts a treat in his mouth and asks him to eat. He then turns toward Jiwoo and says their chairwoman wanted to see him and come to see them, but she is just too busy with everything that has happened. Jiwoo replies he will go since he has no problem walking, and Jisuk asks him to get something to eat on his way back. The snack bar right next to their headquarters sells the best fritters. Subin asks him to get some tteokbokki for her, and Wooin says he wants jjajangmyeon. Jisuk says he should just eat fritters and tteokbokki, and Subin asks how he will eat the noodles while lying in bed. On the other side, Mr. Suman agrees to take Seokjeol with him, but he has to make it official with Shinhwa. He gets so happy at this, and his assistant asks him not to get all hyped up, and he will have to get reassessed back in Baekdu. However, he is happy that he is going with them, and they see Jiwoo outside Ji-young's room. He tells Mr. Suman that he was one of the guys with Jisuk the other day. He also recognizes him, and Seokjeol asks him about Jiwoo. He seems confused when In-hyuk tells him that he is a newly found awakened one, and he didn't know he was one until very recently. He asks Jiwoo angrily about Jisuk, but Jiwoo says he knows where he is and that it is best to keep it there. Seokjeol grinds her teeth out of anger and asks him if he is also an awakened one since he is in Shinhwa's building, and he replies that he is unaffiliated. He then offers Jiwoo to have a spar with him. Jiwoo and others are surprised at his sudden request, and Seokjeol says he doesn't belong to a group, so he has to fight him to prove himself. Mr. Suman asks him not to be so rude, and In-hyuk also interrupts and says Jiwoo got severely injured recently and is under treatment, and he can't move one of his arms properly. However, they are shocked when Jiwoo says he can fight him, and In-hyuk asks him not to push himself like that. Jiwoo says in real combats, other awakened ones won't go easy on him simply because HS is injured. Mr. Suman thinks he is unaffiliated, which means he hasn't realized he was an awakened one until very recently. However, he talks like he has been in the field for a long time. After some time, they reach the gym and are facing each other for the spar. Jiwoo thinks he needs to get it together since other awakened ones won't go easy on him because he is injured. Kaden once told him that they would rather show no mercy and focus their attacks on his injuries. He thinks Mr. Caden was right, and based on what happened with the Klein brothers and all, he needs to become stronger to protect and be of help to his people. Ji-young is also there, and she seems unhappy. She says she doesn't understand why this is happening. Seok-cheol asks him if he is sure he can fight and says he wouldn't ask him if he knew he was injured, and now he can barely move his hand. Ji-woo says he is fine and has one arm to fight with, and Seok-cheol thinks this body looks all nice and makes him feel weak. He thinks he can't be a softie because he must show them his strength. He sees Ji-young there and wonders who that pretty lady is. However, they are about to start the fight and decide to do their best. In-hyuk asks them to get ready, and Ji-woo observes from his stance that he fights at close range. Mr. Suman asks In-hyuk to stop him because he was badly wounded, and he replies he will be alright. He asks him if he hasn't heard the news. He shocked him after revealing that Ji-woo was the one who defeated Suchin back in the academy. In the meantime, the bell rings and Seok-cheol falls in front of them in just a moment. They are shocked that he attacks him with his left arm, and Mr. Suman is still shocked that he beat Suchin. He then goes to see Ji-young, and she asks him about his health. She says that this time, he really risked her life. She says she doesn't blame him because it's on them for not telling him that the Klein brothers had escaped. She apologizes to him and says they thought the truth would shake him up, so they tried to protect him while keeping that information from him. They didn't expect things to go so out of hand. Ji-woo asks her to stop and not to apologize to him, saying it's all his fault. He gave her agents the slip, knowing they were only trying to protect him, but Ji-young says they wouldn't have done that if they had told him everything. Ji-woo says they can say they are equally at fault, and she agrees. She then asks him about their fight with one of the Klein brothers, and she appreciates him for pulling off himself. She remembers when Jisuk told her that Ji-woo was just a genius. He has people call him a genius, but Ji-woo is the real deal. She says he is getting stronger by the second, and with Caden as his mentor, he will get even stronger. This will be more of the reason for him to be careful, and no matter how strong he gets, with wrong beliefs and ideology, he will not be a benefit to the world but harm. He seems to understand her, and after some time, they say goodbye to each other because Ji-young is busy. Ji-woo is about to leave the room when he stops and calls her, saying the dress looks very pretty on her. She seems embarrassed when Ji-woo again appears there and asks if she knows where the snack bar famous for fritters is. Everyone is shocked to see that she comes with him to bring snacks. Ji-woo says she didn't have to come with him all the way there and asks if she also wants to join them. She gets quiet at this, and Ji-woo remembers she said she was busy. At the same time, In-hyuk goes to her office, but she is not there, and he remembers she said she had a lot of things to do. Ji-young carries a snack for him and asks Ji-woo not to do anything that could slow down his recovery. When they enter the room, they are shocked to see that Subin and Jisuk are fighting wildly and ask each other to shut up. Jisuk sees her first and asks what brought her there, and she says that she is busy. Ji-woo tells them that they have brought a whole lot of tteokbokki and fritters. Woo-in looks toward Ji-woo and asks him about jjajangmyeon, and Subin scolds him, saying he is still not over this. Jisuk says they will order for him later and asks him to stop talking about it. After some time, he uses his awakened power to put the chicken in his mouth. They scold him, saying he went on and on about jjajangmyeon just to chow down on tteokbokki, who is eating more than any of them. They all stare at him while he eats quietly, and Caden watches them. After that, Ji-young drops him off at his home and says he is still healing and that a lot has happened to him lately. She asks him if he is sure he is going to be okay, and she still believes that he has been discharged too early. Ji-woo says he is fine and has no problem moving his arm and doing his chores. He is also a little worried about his cats. Suddenly, Ji-woo says she is amazing. While living as an awakened one, he realizes how important and great Shinhwa is, and she is the chairwoman of such a group, which means she must be burdened with a lot of responsibilities and duties. Ji-young gets shy and says she is just doing her job. They reach outside his home, and Ji-woo asks if she wants to come in for a cup of tea, and she seems surprised by the offer. Then she leaves by saying she has to do something and will accept the offer at a later time. After that, he goes to his home and starts training. When he gets tired, Caden comes to him and says he always tries hard in everything. However, something is different this time, and he asks him why he is pushing himself so hard. Jiwoo gets up and says he wants to get stronger. Kaden is trying to observe them and says he has always wanted to get stronger, but something about him has changed. Jiwoo says he realized in the most recent fight that being weak makes him feel pathetic, but it was much more painful than he thought. He just had to sit and watch while Jisuk and Subin were on the brink of death. He thought his heart was going to burst as they got hurt before his eyes. He has tears in his eyes and asks Kaden if he knows what Jisuk told him as he breathed what could have been his last breath. Kaden is still quiet when he tells him that Jisuk asked him to run away. They thought of him as a friend, but because he was too weak, all he could do was watch. Kaden says he still won, and he defeated that flame-throwing man. Jiwoo wipes his tears and says he got lucky, and if Jisuk and Subin hadn't helped, and if his opponent hadn't let his guard down, he couldn't have beaten him. He is now scared that something like that might happen again. Kaden says he is right that he won by luck, and if that guy had given his best shot from the beginning, they would have been killed one by one. He advises him to learn from his weaknesses and work to improve them, which is very important and will help him reach his goal accordingly. He then asks him to sit straight and close his eyes, and he is going to put his power into his body so he can feel how to move and use his power. Since he doesn't engage in close combats as Jiwoo does, he couldn't teach him the optimized method that works for him, so he has done his research and come up with a way to utilize his power that best works with his techniques and combat style. Jiwoo thinks something feels different this time, and it's still very much like the force control Mr. Kaden taught him, but it's moving through a slightly different path. Kaden tells him that the way he gathers the power is still the same, and what changes is the way it moves and its directions feel and remembers how his power courses through his body. Jiwoo is impressed that Kaden is doing this much for him while he shouts at him and asks him to focus. He then feels the power he is giving, and it feels different from the usual. He thinks of memorizing this path and making it. Kaden is surprised that he can already move his power life and smirks at thinking he never ceases to surprise him. After that, when he absorbs the power within his body, Kaden asks him how he feels about it. Jiwoo is not sure, but he can tell that it's different, and Kaden says it would have been weird if he picked it up immediately and asked him to keep using it, and eventually, he will figure it out. Jiwoo thanked him for studying him, and he replied that it was just him, not just for him. Jiwoo doesn't understand him, and he says he got the idea while figuring out a way to fight eventually as a cat, and thanks to that, his kitty punch got stronger. Jiwoo asks him if he will have to throw his punch the way he kitty punches to make his attack stronger. Kaden refuses him and says he has thought through such basics before teaching him. On the other side, Jisuk and Subin are all in chairs and want to start a race in which whoever reaches the first floor from the 5th floor will win. They have promised Wooin that the winner will buy him jajangmyeon, and whoever loses becomes the winner's slave for a week. Subin calls Jisuk and says he is already her slave, and they start fighting again. Meanwhile, Jiwoo and Kaden reach there and are shocked to see them. In the meantime, In-hyuk also appears there and says if their goal is to reach the 1st floor, then he will throw them out of the window. On the other hand, Mr. Suman thinks that because of the recent incident, Shinhwa began their official investigation, and the union probably started theirs, too. They haven't found out that Baekdu was behind helping those criminals, but they won't be able to keep this secret forever. With what Shinhwa and the union are capable of doing, they will find out sooner or later. They don't have enough evidence now, but they will catch on to them if they keep making trouble. Suddenly, they can feel an earthquake, creating cracks in the building. It's Mr. Supal, the chairman of Baekdu, and he seems to be furious at Sukon. He asks him to say something, and Suchin replies he doesn't understand what he is talking about. His father asks him to tell him about the incident in which he lost Baekdu's face in the academy. Suchin wonders how his father knew about it, and he had told those two people never to tell him, and Mr. Seong is still unconscious. He calls him again and asks if he is talking to a brick wall, which makes him more scared. Suchin admits that he lost, but he was caught off guard. He belittles his opponent and treats him lightly. His father pushes him away and makes him fall to the ground, saying he is very disappointed in him. He starts bleeding, and Mr. Supal asks him why he lost because of letting his guard down. Suman appears there and comes for his help. He asks his elder brother why he is doing this to him. Mr. Supal seems worried and says he doesn't have an idea what he has done, and he is shocked that he found out about this. His father asks Sachin to prove that he won't lose to anyone if he doesn't let his guard down. He also asks him to make sure no one gets to mess with him. He gets up and says he will prove himself. On the other side, Jiwoo is running toward the school, and Kaden asks him to run and use his power as he tells him. Jiwoo thinks he gets what Mr. Kaden meant, and is using the same amount of energy as before, but he is getting the most out of it. The old force control wasn't inadequate, but this one feels more suitable, and it's ideally designed to help him fully utilize his body. Kaden asks him why he is smiling suddenly, and Jiwoo replies it's so fun to get stronger and move all he wants. He then goes to feed the stray cats and says he is there a bit early today. Meanwhile, Sachin appears behind him and says he is having the time of his life. Jiwoo asks him what brought him there, and he replies that he wants to talk to him. He sees him from afar and follows him just to catch him feeding some dumb cats. Jiwoo asks him what he wants from him, and he offers to spar with him again. Susian says they will have to spar in 10 days. This time, they won't settle on who wins and loses, but fight until one becomes incapable of combat. Sachin says he should know that he would have defeated him if he hadn't let his guard down and given everything he had. Jiwoo thinks he is right because he would have lost without a chance if he had attacked him with all his might. However, he admits that Jiwoo defeated him, and he won't deny the fact that he lost. But he wants to fight him again, which will take 10 days. Jiwoo asks him what he will do if he refuses his offer, and he replies that he can't do this because this is also an order from his father, the chairman of Baekdu. His loss is a loss of Baekdu, and his father does whatever he can to bring him down. Jiwoo agrees to spar him, and Sachin turns back while smiling. He exclaims he did him a favor, so he will do a favor and let him have the home ground. Shinhwa is his sponsor, so their headquarters will be where they will fight, and he will have Baekdu relay the message to them. He then leaves him, asking him to see him in 10 days. Jiwoo asks Kaden what he should do, and he replies that he will have to train hard, as always. He asks him to change the training style, and instead of accumulating power, he asks him to focus on making the new force control him. Kaden feels worried and asks him not to be so stressed about it. Things like this happen whenever he defeats someone with a group. The more famous the group is and the higher the defeated awakened one is in the group, the more brutal they retaliate. Jiwoo asks him what this happens, and he replies that there are different reasons, but usually, for the reason Sachin told him earlier that a member's loss is a loss of the group. Kaden asks him if he thinks he can win, and Jiwoo replies he is not sure because, as Susian said, he only won. After all, he let his guard down, and he won't get that chance again. Kaden asks him if he knows what he has to do when he is not confident in himself and says he has to train until he gains that confidence. They start running with the determination that they will try hard. After that, he goes to see his friends in the hospital, and they are shocked to hear that he will spar with Sachin again. Subin shouts at him and asks why he didn't pick up her phone, and he ignores her messages. Jiwoo apologizes to them and says he left his phone at home. He asks them how they knew about it, though. Jisuk replies that Baekdu got in touch with Shinhwa just a while ago and is asking for access to their rings since he and Sachin have been sparring in 10 days. They ask him multiple questions, and Jiwoo says he came by this morning and asked him to spar again. He couldn't refuse and said it was just a spar so he wouldn't have to put his life on the line, and he would probably fully recover in 10 days. Subin knows that Baekdu would have pulled every string they could to save Sachon's face, and it won't be anything like the last time. He won't let his guard down and will be prepared for his power. Jisuk says he should have already told him, and Jiwoo asks what he should told him. Jisuk states he should have told him to take down the Klein brothers before challenging him, and he is quiet at his weird request. He only has 10 days left, but with all of them injured like this, there's no way they can help them train, and Jiwoo asks them not to worry about it and to focus on getting better. After that, they are still worried about him, and Subin says the situation is terrible. Sachin's probably gnashing his teeth over losing to Jiwoo, which isn't going to be another ordinary sparring. Baekdu got Sachin's back, and Jisuk asked if they should ask In Hyuk for help, but they were all busy with what happened, and he was rarely at the headquarters. On the other side, when Jiwoo gets home, he is surprised to see Ji-young at the gate. She also heard about what's going on from Baekdu and says it won't be an easy match. He will prepare for every possible way this fight could turn out by training with an awakened one who fights the way he does. She also says the sparring won't be all that friendly, and one will get severely injured. Jiwoo also says he is aware of that, and she says he is very much like Kaden because he is his mentor. As he knows, Kaden is one of the strongest awakened ones in the world, and he is unique. He has challenged and defeated all sorts of strong awakened ones and proved his strength without being affiliated with a group. He never turned down a challenge, and not even when the opponent was known to be stronger than him. Jiwoo also challenges himself and never runs away from a fight, but Jiwoo says he is nothing compared to Mr. Kaden. Ji-young asks him to come to Shinhwa in the morning tomorrow, and she will help him with his training. Jiwoo is surprised and tries to refuse, but she asks him to go to Shinhwa tomorrow. She leaves him at the gate, and Jiwoo enters the home, where Kaden sleeps peacefully with the other cats. The next day, he reaches Shinhwa and remembers Ji-young telling him that she would be waiting for him at the ring. The previous day, he told Kaden that Ji-young wanted to help him with the training and said it was great because she is known to be the strongest awakened one in Korea. While talking to him, he tries to swing the rope, and it's a kind of workout for him. He says Jiwoo shouldn't miss a chance to learn from someone as talented as her, and he is sure she has a teaching style entirely different from his. Jiwoo asks him what he is doing by swinging in the air, and Kaden replies he is trying to improve his flexibility. At present, he reaches the ring, but no one is there. Meanwhile, Ji-young enters the ring and says he is early. She walks away, asking him to get to work, and says she doesn't have time to teach him anything new, so they will train by having practice fights. Jiwoo asks her if he shouldn't fight against someone who uses gravitational power like Suchin, and she says she can imitate it for him. Suddenly, she creates a strong stream of wings, pulling him downward, and Jiwoo feels like it is crushing him down. She then flies him in the air using wind pressure and says she can do this. Jiwoo remembers this is similar to the skill Suchin used earlier. She then uses another skill, and Jiwoo feels like he is getting squashed, and this is just like Suchin's other skill. Ji-young reveals that she has copied Baekdu's skill, which puts a gravitational point within the opponent's body so that they get crumpled, and she blows wind from all directions to put pressure against him. Jiwoo gets tired, and Ji-young says she is not an expert at using these skills as other strong gravitational awakened ones, but it's enough to mimic Suchin. Jiwoo is impressed by her and says she is fantastic, and she has to be strong and in complete control of her power to do all this. He is really impressed that she can do so much with her wind and thinks Mr. Kaden was right that getting help from Ji-young is the chance of a lifetime. She then asks him to start practice, and she will use Baekdu's skills to slow him down. She ties her hair and asks him to show her how he will deal with them. Jiwoo thinks her power is beyond her imagination, so he needs to do his best. At the beep sound, he jumps from his place. He reaches her in no time and tries to attack, but she creates a power barrier around her, and he can't even touch her. He smiles and says his skill doesn't work on her, and he says he wanted to attack right at the start since the longer the spar lasts, the worse things will work out for him. Ji-young asks him to take it up a notch, and she doesn't consider his improvement. After some time, he returns home, and as soon as he enters the door, he falls to the ground out of tiredness. Kaden asks him if he had a rough day, and he tells him that none of his skills worked on her. He also tells him that she was able to copy Baekdu's skill using wind, and Kaden replies it is not surprising. She has been talented and robust since she was little, but she is still nothing compared to him. Jiwoo asks him if he has known Ji-young for that long, and he replies that he hasn't met her but has known her for a while. Although Korean awakened ones are known to be weak compared to other countries, being the national best isn't just something he can be. Kaden says the more surprising thing is that she got that title a year ago, and there has never been an awakened one who got acknowledged at such a young age. That was also the reason why Korean awakened ones were looked down on, and people thought Korea must be full of 2-bit awakened ones to have such a young one in the lead. Jiwoo asks him how old Ji-young is, and he replies she's probably just a few years older than him. He then asks him to come downstairs, and he needs to regain power through force control and get back to training. On the other hand, Suchin is training with his father and is badly injured. He asks him if this is all he got, and he gets up, saying he is still going. Mr. Suman comes for help and says he is taking this training too far. Supal asks him not to be ridiculous, and as the son of Baekdu's leader, he should have always trained this hard, and they have been going easy on him for far too long. He exclaims it's no wonder that he gets beaten by a pure nobody like that, and Mr. Suman asks him not to push him so hard since he has sparring coming up, and at this rate, he is going to collapse. He then leaves him, asking him to be ashamed of himself. Mr. Suman seems worried about him and asks if he is okay. Sachin replies that he is fine and promises himself that he will never lose again from Ji Wuxiu. 10 days later, Caden is not feeling good because he has